Okay, should be live. Let me know how the sound is, per usual. Let me know how the picture is. And I'm checking it myself too, as always. Good, we're live. All right. Please hit the like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. And subscribe if you're not subscribed. But tonight we are going to talk about a discussion that was had between Alex O'Connor, who is a philosophy um, personality, I guess. I would just call him a philosopher who's very popular on YouTube. I've talked about some of his discussions before. I think he's very philosophically talented, and don't agree with him on all of his takes. I think he's a self-described atheist that studies theology, which I appreciate that he seems to make a genuine effort. But there's a lot I don't agree with him on, but I definitely appreciate the effort that he puts in, and he is very talented. And he has a discussion recently with Annaka Harris, who is Sam Harris's wife. I did not know that. Sam Harris, another person who I disagree with on quite a bit, involving the metaphysics of fundamentality in some ways. I think on the surface we would say a lot of the same thing, but deep down I think there is a bit of a difference. But Annaka and Alex discuss her journey on evolving to believe now that what she believes, which is that consciousness is fundamental, and this is basically what Sentient Singularity Theory asserts as well. And so we're going to talk about how her thoughts relate to Sentient Singularity Theory as usual, because there's plenty of things that I agree with her on, and I think she's really right about in this, and it's a great discussion. And there's also like some fundamental differences that I think must be kind of overcome, but it's a tough jump for a lot of people to make. But the link to their full discussion is below if you want to check it out. I highly recommend that. Anybody who I talk about on here in these discussions is always welcome to come on. If I ever misrepresent anything, definitely would appreciate anybody who reaches out. And my universal disclaimer is that I agree with well, I don't agree with anyone on everything, but I agree with everyone on something. I will get better at that. But so this is the talk that we're going to be going over. This is Alex's channel, and then their talk is called "This Consciousness Fundamental," and she did a 10 or 11-hour documentary, audio documentary called "Lights On," which is actually a great name. I really like that. Very biblical in some ways, but it's about why she believes consciousness is fundamental. Apparently, I have not listened to it, but I do plan on it. But I did link it below for those of you who want to check it out. It seems, I'm sure, quite rigorous. And oh man, I'm definitely going to dive into this, and then I'm sure we'll talk about it. But 11 hours, that's like almost as long as 2 of my streams. But all right, so let's get into it. First clip is right here.
If you've got salt.
Hold on. 1 second. Here we go. I could not live, I will just say this, I could not live without YouTube Premium anymore. That is the one subscription service I could never live without. I feel like every time I don't have it and an ad pops up, oh man, I can't handle it. But here we go.
Ask is how would you describe where your worldview was on consciousness and where is it now?
Okay. Well, I would say originally, I made the assumption that most scientists make, certainly most neuroscientists. At the time, I was working with neuroscientists primarily, that consciousness emerges at some level of complex processing, namely in brains, that you would only find consciousness in, living creatures that have a brain and a central nervous system. How simple the creature could be, we're not sure. There's a lot to learn. We don't quite understand how this comes into being, but the assumption was that that is where consciousness arises in the universe, and at some point we will understand why that is the case. So in my about 20 years working with neuroscientists, what I kept bumping up against was this realization that this assumption we've made about consciousness being connected to complexity and arising at this very high level of information processing, that the intuitions we have for making those assumptions are actually false intuitions. And they're intuitions that we know to be false based on modern neuroscience.
Huh.
And so the more I was recognizing that the more we learn about the brain, the less firm the ground is that we're standing on when we try to assume that consciousness is emergent and complex and only arises in brains. And so I noticed this kind of chipping away of what I thought was evidence that we had for making this assumption, and realized we actually don't. And so we can get into those details if you want. But by the end of my writing my book, Conscious, I had become convinced that I'll put it this way, so that we can make one of two assumptions when we want to try to understand what consciousness is. And we really are, because we don't know the answer, we're kind of forced to start with one or another assumption. So when we look out at the universe, at all of the matter and all the configurations of matter and everything that comes into being, we can look out at all of that and say, okay, which configurations of matter contain consciousness or give rise to conscious experiences? And the answer is either all or some. We know the answer isn't none because we have evidence of at least our own conscious experiences. And so we've led with the assumption that the answer is some. Not all of them are, some of them are. And so which ones and how does it come into being? And I realized that the reasons for making that assumption that we have actually fall apart pretty quickly upon closer inspection, and that it logically actually makes more sense to assume that all of them do. And I know that sounds crazy, and it still sounds crazy even to me. And this is part of my journey and part of why I wanted to talk to all of these scientists. I actually wanted to be talked out of this position by smart people if I was in fact wrong, but I couldn't shake the fact that when I looked at modern neuroscience, when I looked at what we do know and don't know, it actually makes slightly more sense to assume consciousness is a much more fundamental feature of the universe. Is something that is, not it's obviously fascinating, mysterious, and interesting, but perhaps not complex. So perhaps something more like gravity and less like high levels of computation.
Okay, so definitely agree with what she just said, and that's definitely true, and even more fundamentally true than trying to look at neuroscience and things like that is that we can look at our own self and we can examine our our thought process, which is, by the way, there's only one way to think, and if you examine this process from a first principles perspective, what you will get is uh, a hierarchy of assumption. And so this is what is missing from science currently, is the acknowledgement of two things. One of them is that there are super subjective realities that all of us know personally, and the other one is that there is which really means, like, I can't know you're conscious or sentient, you can't know I'm sentient, but you know that you're sentient and I know that I'm sentient, and we all know that we ourselves are sentient, even though you don't know whether or not anyone else or anything else is that you observe is sentient. You know that you are. And so this is a universally known but subjectively perceived truth by everyone. It's a very unique thing because everything else is anything else that's universally understood really by anyone that exists would have to be something that we can all perceive, but we actually can't all perceive the sentience of each other. We can only perceive the sentience of ourselves. But because we all do perceive the sentience of ourselves, then we do know, all of us, that sentience exists, and that it is shared, by everybody by definition. A sentient being is a being. Someone is being, and so this is something that isn't thought about in science. It's just always what is objective. What can we all look at and observe from the outside? But the problem is that sentience, or consciousness, but I don't like the term, they use it a lot, but sentience is a better term, we'll talk about why, is something that can only be observed from the inside out, or from the inside, not from the outside. And that's not how science is normally done, because science requires falsifiability usually as a qualifier of what is legitimate and what is not. But good luck falsifying your sentience, because you can't. You are constant proof of your own sentience. Any attempt to falsify your own sentience is self-defeating of even the attempt. And then you can't falsify or prove the sentience of anyone else, because you can't actually perceive it. And so this puts sentience or consciousness a bit outside the realm of our current conceptualization of what we call science. And science really today just means the collective narrative of the pursuit of truth via a logical and rigorous and observational approach. That's really all it is, and an experimental approach. But it is a requirement that we incorporate sentience into any scientific narrative that we have, and we've kind of cut it out. But that doesn't make any sense, because we are the writers and perceivers of this narrative. So how can you cut us out? And it ends up leading to nonsense. And that brings me to my next point, which is that there is a hierarchy of assumption that must be understood and recognized when you are trying to examine anything. And what our hierarchy of truth is that we must prioritize our firsthand experience above any secondhand information. And that is the assumption that we exist, that I am, I am conscious, I am sentient, I do exist. That is the first assumption that we must make in order to build any other assumptions on, because who's doing the assuming? And we're going to get to that, because it kind of falls apart in certain instances with Annaka here. And I will say, I really appreciate her endeavor, and I agree with it, and I support it. I think it's funny, in this she talks about integrated information theory, and she basically says that she thinks it's false, which I agree with her. And it's kind of a more fundamental theory of information, which kind of leads to some type of placing consciousness as more fundamental, kind of like assembly theory and sentient singularity theory and conscious agent theory and observer theory and all these other theories that are coming out. But integrated information theory there's some things that are probably quite wrong with it, and she acknowledges that, but she says that she supports it because it's important it's helpful in pushing the narrative, science more towards the narrative that it needs to move towards, and towards truth. It's not at the truth, but it is more towards it. And I would agree with that. And I would say that's true of her reasoning on a lot of what her thoughts are here. But and so it's interesting, because Sam Harris says that free will is an illusion. He talks about it, and she's just going to talk about it here. But Sam has a very, very different definition of free will than I do. So I would say his definition of free will, I would disagree. I would say that doesn't exist, but I don't think that that's a sensible definition of free will either. But she goes on to talk about some fundamental things that I think are important for us to discuss. But even though I disagree with her on those things, she is advancing our discussion towards the truth, and I support it. But yeah, I mean, this is what we have an inside view on an assembly of perceived matter, at least, and that inside view is that of sentient experience. And that means that to the best of our knowledge, of our, not just knowledge as in things that we read, I mean like things that we know, is that existence is sentient. That is what your firsthand experience supports. We look out and we at existence, and we're like, we assume that we are unique, but that's actually not a logical perspective to take. We have to recognize and incorporate our hierarchy of assumption into our examination of anything that we want to understand, and that means recognizing first and foremost that basically the answer to the question of what is the truest thing that I know, and the truest thing that I know is that I am. That is the truest thing that you know. It's the truest thing that I know. It's the truest thing that Annaka knows, and it's the truest thing that Alex knows. At least we're going to get to that. I don't know if Annaka would say it's the truest thing that she knows, but I would say it might not be the truest thing she thinks she knows, but it is the truest thing that she feels that she knows, and the truest thing that, and I mean feeling as in like perception of, not feeling as in I want it to be true, as in I mean it as in I'm seeing it to be true. And it is also her operative truth. It has to be. If it wasn't your operative truth, then you would never make it to adulthood. So but we're going to get into that. Let's go to the chat. What's up, Addie? And no is one. I exist and good enough reason. What you don't exist is an illusion. I don't know if that grammar is correct, but it's making it hard to understand exactly what you're saying, but probably right. All right. So there, she talks about, though, in this in the clip prior, is that this is the big question, is what structures that exist in existence are sentient and which ones are not, because we know that we are sentient. We know it. We also think that this pen is not sentient. We don't know, but we think. I think it's not sentient. According to Sentient Singularity Theory, it's not sentient. And yet, when you do take a first principles approach to examining what is the fundamental nature of existence, you must assume that it is sentience, because it's the truest thing that you know about your existence. And that is it's the most connected perspective that you could have on existence. You are getting an inside view of existence, not just an outside view, which I don't even know what that would look like, but an inside view of existence, like a totally detached outside view of existence. I don't think that can really work. But and so you actually have to trust that. And an example of this is basically, imagine I tell you that water is cold, and then you touch it. I use this example all the time, and it burns you, and you feel it. You should not prioritize my telling you that the water is cold. You should prioritize your feeling of the water being hot. And that means that your experience is what must be prioritized. And this is definitely something that is not taken into account. In fact, it is actively rejected within our scientific narrative right now. And I think there's lots of reasons for that have come together, but really school just makes people adopt beliefs that are incoherent with the rest of their experience, and they just accept it because it gets them a grade. But you couldn't operate like that. If you didn't operate with the truest thing that I know is that I am, and you just accepted anything else that somebody told you as being true, or even something else that contradicted your experience, and you truly started to operate as if that was the assumption, you would destroy yourself. And some people have done this, and they are destroying themselves. And we have to check ourselves for that, but it's, yeah, I mean, you can destroy yourself quickly, or you can destroy yourself slowly over time. But if you deny things that are if you deny your own experience, you will eventually destroy yourself, because your experience and you are intrinsically tied. And you could say like a mind is an entanglement of perspectives, and that is, it is this cogenerative loop, I guess you could say, even though there is a directionality to it. So, which we're going to get to. So even it's not even about like, oh, what structures are sentient, what structures aren't at first, or whether or not sentience is fundamental or not, or emergent or not. It is, what is the truest thing that I know about existence, and what does that mean for what I must assume about existence beyond me? And I think that logically that will lead you to sentience is fundamental. And then you also recognize that some structures don't appear to be sentient, and some structures do. Your dog appears to be sentient. You don't know, but it appears to be. Pens don't appear to be. And so we need a framework, and Michael Levin talks about this, that is outlining of what structures, or proposing an outline of what structures would be most likely sentient and which ones are most likely not, and why. And people have proposed things like this in panpsychism before, and or trying to get like various fixes for this kind of problem, and it hasn't really panned out. Usually there's some kind of logical issue with it, but sentient singularity theory, I think so far, is the one that seems to be most coherent. At least doesn't mean it's perfectly accurate, it just means it appears to be most coherent about outlining which of these structures would be sentient and which ones would not. And but you get a lot of models where it's people say starts with mineral mind, or elemental mind, and then mineral mind, and then plant mind, and animal mind, and then it's I don't know, Gaia mind, that with the earth, and then it's solar mind and galaxy mind, and it's just a scaling of size, and of our assumption of size, really, and that is stuck in relativity, and that is not that is not the space in which space, that is not where consciousness is, or sentience is. I mean, if I asked you where in space-time is your sentience, you could not point to it. You could point to your body. Some people will falsely point to the brain, but they don't even know that. And it's not just in one location. I mean, if you've ever been on Twitter before and gotten angry, then that it's not about physical boundaries of a physical body alone. There is an extension to everyone that can project and connect. So let's move on. I will say about that last thing, I let her say, mention a bunch of things that I wanted to touch on, is when she said consciousness, which I think sentience is a better term to use, but she says consciousness is, and we'll get into exactly why consciousness is the bad term, but and it kind of, I don't know if they intend to get into it, but they definitely highlight why it is. But she says sentience or consciousness might be more like gravity, but and less like complex computations, and so it might not be so complex, and it might not be a matter of complexity, like many people who work in AI right now think that if just a matter of computing power, how much computing power could you put in, and how complex can you make your algorithm eventually, like if it's sufficiently complex. I hate the word complex. It is the most confusing word that I think really exists, that and esoteric maybe, but it's counterproductive. Complex is not a description. that is useful in any way, shape, or form. But at least not when discussing the truth of anything. It's just that's just complex. Just means daunting looking, or like, you know, something that can't be digested, you know, by, in a single look. Essentially, it's like, if I need to figure something out, it's complex. I got my dog a new bed last night. I had to watch the video on Amazon on how to put it together. Does that make it complex? It was complex for me. It felt complex, even though it was very simple once I watched the video. But looking at the paper directions, it seemed pretty complex. I couldn't use them, but it was really because the paper directions were really shitty. Like they didn't tell you what you needed to do. And so as soon as I looked at the video, I was like, wow, this is actually like very simple. It's not complex. And I remember I said to my wife, this bed is more complicated than the other one, because I could just figure out her previous bed, how to put it together, my dog's previous bed. And then I get this one, and it just wasn't as intuitive. And I was like, this one's more complicated, which basically means complex. And it wasn't. I just needed to watch a video and see how actually simple it was. It was actually more simple in some ways, whatever that means. And so it wasn't even more simple. It's just easier to put together once you knew what you're doing. So that's I definitely agree with her that it is much more like gravity. In fact, I think gravity is the motion of a mind that we are within. It is the motion of a being that we're within. Imagine you're a cell inside of a body, and that body starts to move. Your whole world around you, everyone, including you, and every structure that you see, and everything that you navigate is going to simultaneously move together in some way, shape, or form. Some places in your body will move closer together, and some will move further apart. This is exactly our experience of space-time and gravity, and which are basically space and time and gravity are all kind of just three different views of one structure. Gravity would be like the action that we perceive, or the motion of it, and time would be the our perception of the previous and state of it, and how it relates to the present state. And then space is just your location, I guess you could say, or your current circumstances is really what it is. Like your current perceived physically constrained or concretely constrained circumstances. Your present concretely constrained circumstances would be space. And so that is exactly, think about that, being a cell inside a body. It seems to start to look a lot like what we see in the laws of physics when we look out at the world, and we see gravity and space and time. So I agree with her. It's not complex. That's not a technical term. It's just it just means confusing. These people, so I'm gonna rip on this again, because like I went to a talk by Scott Aronson that was put on by Ekkolapto, who I put on the Sentient Singularity Theory intro at FAU a couple weeks ago. That's linked below. And I don't know when that's coming out, but I'll post it at some point once it does. But it was with Scott Aronson, and I heard some people who were at this event talk about, complexity, and you hear like people say, I study complexity. It's like, I'm always just confused at what it means to study complexity. It sounds like it's just, it sounds like I study confusing things, which just seems ridiculous. But I don't think that they've thought enough about what complexity is, or if they're defining it in a certain way. I would say it's probably not the best definition that they're using, because it's not intuitive. Complex usually means confusing, or multifaceted, which is not a technical description. Next clip. This is very good.
But the idea is that if consciousness is kind of the fundamental thing, it is actually what the math and the physics is describing at bottom. And it's why we have such a hard time grappling with the
Bingo. By the way, I've been saying this on this stream for years.
Of quantum mechanics, because if at bottom what everything is made of is felt experience, there's a very different way to interpret what we see at the level of the quantum. And so I'm not saying that matter, it doesn't exist or something else or is created by the mind or anything else, but that matter at bottom, what it actually is felt experience. It's describing felt experience. And one thing that's very interesting to me is that clearly, if consciousness is fundamental, there's a structure to it. I mean, we see nothing but structure, and the laws of nature are the laws of nature. And so, yeah, that's something that I've become very interested in. The kind of the end of the documentary starts to deal with is, why does consciousness have a structure? How is the structure related to what's experienced? Similar to what neuroscience has been doing this whole time, but it applies it to everything rather than just the brain. We understand when the brain is in certain states, it causes certain experiences to arise. We have a general sense of why an experience of green materializes when I look at a leaf. We can understand the light waves bouncing off the leaf, entering the retina, being processed by the brain, and then the brain generates this experience of seeing green. The green is not out there in the world, but the experience of green is generated based on this structure and how I'm interacting with the outside world. And so the question would really just kind of move from neuroscience to the rest of the world. What is it about the structure that we perceive? How is that related to the experiences that arise? And, what is the range of experiences that arise?
We'll get back to Annaka.
Okay. So, agree with what she said. It's brilliant. It's exactly right. And I've said this since the beginning of this channel, is that when you start thinking about sentience as fundamental, a lot of things, and you really think about what that means for the context of our existence, and you think about existence as a mind, as a sentient being that we are within, or that is generating additional sentient beings within itself. A lot of the observations in physics, not just relativity, like I said earlier about cells and what we observe in space and time and gravity, which seem to become intuitive when you start thinking about yourself as a cell inside a body. And what does that mean for the, your perception of your world? By the way, your world, your whole world, not Earth, like the world, your world is like everything that you perceive as the space that you can maneuver. And your world, your cell's world is you. Like, there is no existing outside of the world for a cell of yours for very long, at least. I think maybe sperm, which would be like, I don't know, 3 days. Like, that's like, this is not that, and that doesn't even count. I mean, but I'm talking about like blood cells and things like that. While they're inside your body, their world is you, and every structure in your body is made, that they navigate, is basically made up of cells. That is what has formulated the structure that is your body. Now there's obviously like water and stuff in there too, but their entire world is constructed of cells, and they are a cell. And yet, if they looked out at their world, which means like their space of maneuvering, and you were moving, then their world is going to change in size. It's going to expand. Like, they say the universe is expanding. And imagine your cell inside a body, and that body's growing. What does that look like? I don't know. Maybe it looks like the universe is expanding, and and when you move and the universe seems to bend, space-time seems to bend. I mean, there's so much that appears to be become intuitive from a relativistic perspective. And when you really think fundamentally, even the interactions in quantum mechanics start to become intuitive. And they are not this super complicated, counterintuitive type of weirdness that nobody understands except super geniuses that, you'll never understand. That's not true at all. In fact, I think that anyone can understand intuitively quantum mechanics and general relativity if they have the right context. I say all the time, context is information. There is no information outside of context. context is information. And what that means is that if somebody tells you, oh, there's actually 11 dimensions to spacetime, and you're like, that doesn't make any sense, I don't understand it. It's not because it's too complicated for you and it's sufficiently complex. It is because there's zero context to that statement. It is not consistent with your experience of 4 dimensions of spacetime, which is, length, width, height, time, or XYZ time, which even then, these come from in Sentient Singularity Theory's proposal that they stem from the 4 primary perspectives which make up the backbone of Sentient Singularity Theory, which is inside, outside, separate, and oneness, which are these 4 simultaneously co-defining perspectives, and that are at the heart of our orientation. And then what happens is that you will see this 4-dimensional manifold that when you look at like things sufficiently fundamentally, I guess, for lack of a better term right now, I don't even know if my intuition tells me that's not the right way to say that, but I don't have the time to break it down currently. But this is something that can be very intuitive for all of us. I think anything about existence, if you have the right context then it would become intuitive and natural. And that is especially true of reality. It doesn't make any sense that reality is too confusing for you to understand when you literally maneuver it every single day. Every day. You don't misunderstand reality. It's that what you're taught about reality, which is a bad term as well, but what you're taught about existence in school is not consistent with your felt experience. And because of that, it seems incoherent. But because it's coming from people who have PhDs next to their name, you don't assume that it's incoherent. You assume that it is too complicated for you to get. That's not true. They have no idea what they're talking about, most of them. They really don't. And that's just a fact. I mean, it just is. All right. So, but when she says things like, interestingly enough, let's get into like some of this, because I'm going to show some models from Sentient Singularity Theory that are related to what she was talking about. So when she says something like the math of physics, basically, or even pure math, not even physics, is these mathematical structures that physicists are talking about that don't actually, like, they have no idea what it is in the physical world. Like in string theory, when they have like a Calabi manifold, which is apparently described by Ed Witten, or at least described by Eric Weinstein as Ed Witten's description of the 6-dimensional manifold structure that occurs in every point in space and time. And it's like, what is that? Man, that sounds so crazy. And it seems like it's counterintuitive, or it seems like it's super complicated or beyond you and only can be understood by super genius mathematicians. That's not the case at all. And my theory is that this 6-dimensional manifold structure, like, let's think about it. There is a manifold structure, which means a like multifaceted structure / process that, or ordered structure that exists apparently at every point in space and time. What that really means is that there is a 6-dimensional structure that appears to exist in every point, in every instance of observation that we make of the outside world. And what that really means is that we are perceiving a 6-dimensional manifold structure. It doesn't have, whether or not it's out there or not is not the point. The point is that you're interpreting it as that. And what does that mean for you? Well, what's a 6-dimensional way of thinking about the world? Maybe the primary and secondary colors. That's one of them. And maybe it's the order of operation in mathematics. And maybe it's your limbs. Like, let's look at our limbs. Let's see. We're going to look. We have arms and legs, hands and feet, fingers and toes. Okay? That's your limb. And those are your limbs, and you perceive them as this 6-dimensional structure. If you look at your finger, and I haven't thought about this, so this is a bit of a test, but it's like, what makes up your finger? It's like knuckles and, I don't know, like fingernails and your fingertips, maybe. Like, and I'm not just picking things that are random, and then you could do the same thing for your toes. So basically, like, it'd be, your I don't know what this, structure is, but maybe we don't have a term for it because it's not like what we focus on. It's like, what makes up a finger? Obviously, it's a single structure, so maybe we don't need to focus on that. These in between structure, in between the knuckles, what is the term for that? I don't know. I'm sure there's a term, but the fact that we don't know it means like we're not perceiving it. Like, what we think of what makes up your finger, it's like, we should think about it more so than we should actually like try and look at a structure, because your eyes can deceive you. But if you think about what are the different parts of a finger, everybody's going to say the knuckle, the fingernail, and the fingertip. Everybody has a fingerprint that, we think about that as being part of our finger. And same thing with the toes. You have a toe print, you have knuckles on your toes, and you have toenails. And these are the different parts of the toe. And so this structure is literally everywhere that you look. And it's not just in complex math. It is built into your information processing structure itself, which is your mind. And what I think this is, and what Sentient Singularity Theory seems to suggest, is that it is your mind is taking information from that is kind of being perceived externally, at least, or as it's not just being felt. It's like a little, I guess it's just perception. And here, let me grab this. Where is this model? Here it is, symmetric set. Okay. And it's ordering, your mind is ordering information. And so what does it mean to order information? Well, you have to think about causality, which means like this leads to this leads to this. It's funny, the creators of South Park apparently have, I lived in Burbank, California, which is really where they make all the movies. It's actually Hollywood. It's where all the studios are. They're not in Hollywood. They're in Burbank. And I lived with writers and actors in this house, and they were very into, obviously writing. And one of them told me that the creators of South Park did a documentary about, like, called 6 Days to Air, which I haven't actually seen, but I do like South Park. I think it is brilliant. But they basically talked about how, to write a story, which really means how to have coherent chain of information. Like, that means an information with context, because you have causality in this chain, and which is connectivity. So they said that the easiest way to ruin a story when you're writing a story is to think about it as this and then this and then this and then this, and that's the story. And they said what you really need to think about if you're going to write a good story is this, therefore this, therefore this, therefore this, therefore this, instead of this and then this and then this and then this and then this, which just kind of puts it into this chronological order that doesn't really matter because there's no connectivity between the things. Why do I need to know that this happened before that if that is not the cause of this? And if I know that that is the cause of this, then I don't even need to be told or shown that it is, what the order is. The order is intrinsically understandable because of the causality that is built into the story. And so this is how information is processed in our mind. This is why, the new Star Wars sucked. It's not the only reason, but it's part of it. And you think about it, it's like, it had nothing to do with the old stories, even though they brought back all the same people. Why does it not make any sense? And it's like, because in the first 6, it's like this, therefore this, therefore this, therefore this, therefore this, therefore this. Anakin's the chosen one. He goes and kills the Emperor, therefore he's the chosen one. We have coherence. Then they make these new ones, and it's like, all of a sudden, Emperor's back, and none of what we said mattered to the originals matters anymore, and there's no coherence to it. There's no causality. There's just different bits that have been put in, like by some committee, and instead of by one man's story, it's a bunch of, some committee was like, we need these, we need this, we need this, and we need this, and we need this, and also like, let's throw him in there too, and to give us everybody like a sense of connectivity, let's throw in all the original characters. And then they put it out, and it's like, there's no sense of connectivity at all. I don't even view it as Star Wars, and I'm a fan, but I literally don't even think of it as part of Star Wars. By the way, Andor, perfect coherence and kind of and context, and I recommend that if you're a Star Wars person. It's the only good Star Wars series. There's no other ones that are good, and the reason why it's good though is because you have this that happened from the first 3 movies, or episode 1, 2, and 3, and then episode 4, 5, and 6, and then you have this story taking place right there, and then you have, what was the other one, Rogue One. If you're not a Star Wars person, then you might not know this, but if you are, then it makes sense when I explain that Andor takes place after some events that we understand, because of some events that we understand, and then it goes right before the first scene of Rogue One, right before, and then you get Rogue One, and that goes right up until the first scene of the first episode of Star Wars ever made, which was episode 4. It is perfectly contextualizing. There's none of that in the other movies, and that's why they suck, and why their story sucks, and why nobody feels connected to them either, because there is no coherence. And so you need causality, is my point. Whole Star Wars thing aside, the point of that whole, I guess, side path or whatever it's called, tangent, is that causality is a requirement for the context of information, which is causality is a requirement of context. It is a component of context, and context is information. And so when you're looking at something, you need to understand causality, which means order. This, therefore this, therefore this. And then you need to understand differentiation. This and not is not that, and that is not this. And you need categorization, which is like, this is like this, and this is like that. It's not that, but it's like it because it shares this. And when you have categorization, causation, and differentiation, what you have is this binary triadic structure. Binary mean because it's this and not that, and because this is like this. But then you also have this causality component that requires a triadic perspective. That's why we think of generations. We think of like grandparents, parents, child, or parent, child, grandchild. It's like even our language is split up into this triadic structure, where it's like child, parent, grandparent, or grandchild. And so what this is you are categorizing, differentiating, and ordering into them according to causality, putting the information into like a causal order. When you do that, and you have this triadic structure, and you combine that with this binary structure, you get 6. And so that leads to this: who, what, where, when, why, and how. It's like beings and things, space and time, and, basically, I guess you could say motivation and I don't know, what's it called when you implementation. So it's like, or I guess it'd be like motivation, action, space, time, being, thing. And so here's your limbs, like we said earlier. Here's the nuclear family, like we said earlier. Here's your senses. You have 6 senses, by the way. You don't have 5. Your 6th sense is emotion, and that's it. It's not complicated. But look at the relationship between these. Sight, smell, and hearing are 3 sources of information that you perceive as perception, or you conceive of as perception of information that is not contacting you, that is beyond you, I guess you could say. So you see things that are over there, you hear things that are over there, and you smell things that are over there. The others, touch, taste, and emotion, are when things are perceived as impacting you. So this is things that are around you and beyond you. This is things that impact you. And that you're coming into contact with. They're contacting you. And so you have sense of touch. That's what something is perceived as touching you. Sense of taste. That is what is perceived as tasting, as touching your tongue always. And then you have emotion. And like, think about, when people see a painting or hear a song, it moves them. They say, that moved me, that touched me. It's like, okay, well, you're even using language that implies like contact. And this is why I say, like, maybe it's not best to look, because you can confuse yourself. Because if you look, then scientists will be like, well, no, really what's happening is that taste and smell are basically the same sense. And because your sense of smell is actually basically you tasting little particles in the air of the substance that, you're smelling. And that's not the point. The point is that smell is a different string of information than taste. And if you don't really believe that, then why don't you start eating soap that smells like fruit? Because it tastes terrible. That's why. And it's not even like, well, no, because it's bad for you. It's like every little kid smells the bar of soap that smells like cherries and then tastes it, and it tastes terrible, and you don't continue to try and eat it. And even if it was edible and somebody told you it was edible, you'd still not continue to try and eat it. It doesn't matter how good it smells, because your goal determines which of these perceptions in this manifold structure that I think is a Calabi manifold in string theory is this: the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, emotion, sight, taste, smell, touch, hearing, arms, legs, hands, feet, fingers, toes, red and yellow and blue and purple and green and orange, the primary and secondary colors. With space-time, it's like past and present and future, and length, width, and height. It's not even just length, width, height, time. It's like length, width, height, past, present, future. If we're like thinking about the multidimensionality of the experience of time. And so this 6-dimensional structure is literally everywhere that you look. And I started thinking about like color mixing. It's like, look at your computer screen. They have to, in order to make all these colors, they do, I think it's subtractive color mixing, which is, it utilizes red and blue and green. You look at your pixels and it's just only red and blue and green. And somehow they combine to be every other color that we could think of. But it's just red, blue, and green. And then if you use a printer, do you need to stock it with every color? No, you stock it with 3 colors again. And that's additive color mixing, I think. That's magenta, cyan, and yellow. And it's like, this is, again, a Calabi manifold, which is just basically color combination in some ways. It's color mixing, which is color combination. So, it's even like the regular Platonic solids. It's like there's probably better to think of them as 6 of them instead of 5. Instead of tetrahedron, cube, octahedron, icosahedron, dodecahedron, it's like it's tetrahedron, cube, octahedron, icosahedron, and dodecahedron, and sphere, which is this is a solid 3-dimensional shape that we perceive that has equal sides, all sides being equal. That's what a regular Platonic solid is, and they don't include a sphere in there, and so you get 5, which is honestly kind of confusing. It's like, why 5? It makes a lot more sense if there's 6, and you include a sphere. Of course you have to include a sphere. The sphere is the one-sided shape in which in which it is intrinsically, uniform in its symmetry in some way, in its components. I don't know. In its faces, it's uniform in its faces. In its face, it's just one, but it still works. And same thing with, you have 5 senses. Why 5? No, you have 6. Emotion is, you feel emotions. Why would you ignore that? As a sense? Of course, it's a sense. In fact, it's kind of the summation of all the other senses, and more. So this is what it means that there is a 6-dimensional manifold structure at every point in space and time. It means they've got the description wrong. It means there is a 6-dimensional structure / process to your perception and conception of differentiation. Okay. Now, I would imagine if I asked you, what does that mean? You'd be like, okay, well, I don't know. Maybe I bet you'd be much more likely to arrive at it's the primary and secondary colors than you would if I said it's a 6-dimensional manifold structure at every point in space and time. If you were smoking weed, you'd be like, but really, if you were honest with yourself, and you'd be like, I don't understand that at all. That makes no sense. And it's not because it's beyond you. It's because it doesn't make sense. It's not coherent with your experience. But it is built into your experiences all the time. You have 6 senses. It's like, that is, now all of a sudden the Calabi manifold, if that's what it is very consistent with your experience and very intuitive with your experience. And you can do this with everything. Moods, and the different components of grammar, and you can do this with even the fundamental particles in physics. The leptons, which are half the fermions: electron, neutrino, electron, muon, neutrino, muon, tau, neutrino, tau. Okay, perfect. Fermions, the quarks: up, down, charm, strange, truth, and beauty. Again, perfect. Bosons. This is a little bit more complicated, but you could say like, it's the same structure. They just don't understand that yet, so that's why it's confusing. But in some ways, it's the same structure. You have graviton / Higgs, which really, like, you could even say like there's no perception of the graviton, right? Even if you went with the mainstream assumptions in physics. Graviton is it's the force carrier particle of gravity that's theorized, and they've never observed it, but it's theorized due to mathematical symmetries. Think about a particle that carries gravity, which in the context of gravity is the movement of a being that we're within, and is our perception of the movement of a being that we're within. Okay, well then guess who's the force carrier particle of gravity? It's the universe itself, and so like that is the graviton. It's kind of like it is the universe. That's why you can't perceive it anywhere. now it makes sense why we can't see it anywhere, because you're in it. It's like looking for the forest through the trees, basically, or looking for water in the ocean. But you can see like a point of it that's kind of in a symmetrically central spot, and that's the Higgs. And so, but even if you take the current physics mainstream, bosonic, particles, I guess, then you have these six. You have Higgs, which graviton / Higgs is. They'll say the Higgs is responsible for mass and not gravity, and the graviton is responsible for gravity, not really mass. And it's like, okay, but then they'll tell you that gravity is what causes like mass. But if you think about this as experience, the experience of mass, the experience of weight, the experience of drag in some ways, like it's like, imagine when you're being dragged through the water and you have more drag, you feel heavier, and kind of drag through causality is like gravity in some ways. But this is the same particle. Just this is viewing it from the inside, and this is kind of viewing it from the outside. And but these are, due to forces that are combinatorial. They are responsible for holding things together. Gravity holds things together, and electromagnetism holds things together. Magnetism, which the photon is the force carrier particle of magnetism, and of electromagnetism, of electricity and magnetism, same kind of thing, in some ways. But then you have the gluon, which is the force carrier particle of the strong nuclear force, which holds the atomic nuclei together. Okay, so holds things together. Responsible for decay. These. And if that's the case, then you have differentiation. You have things that hold things together and things that particles that break them apart, basically. That's not exactly it, but it's, for now, that's fine. And then you have these differentiation in kind of scaling in some weird way, which is, really, really more fundamental, a little bit, less fundamental, and a little bit less, I guess you could say, or this is really big, this is like, I don't know, a little bit different in size, I guess. It's not really the best way to think about it as like size, but it's more like, I think it's about context. So like, when you think about like these, it's not about size, or these, it's not about size. It's about what's your goal and where are you right now, which is your goal is kind of where are you right now. So it determines where are you right now. It's like, am I hungry? Okay, then guess what? I need to prioritize this in order to orient in the world. This is where I start. I don't start here, because even though you'd think that you do, but like when I say start, I mean like this is the priority. And you don't prioritize this even though this might help you find food, and it might help you start to judge food. It doesn't actually, it's not the deciding sense when it comes to food. So taste is. Don't eat soap that smells good. And durian smells terrible and it tastes delicious, and people eat it even though it smells like rotten cheese and feet, and people still eat it because it tastes like vanilla and like vanilla custard, but it smells like rotten cheese and feet. People eat it. I once got a durian because I was always curious about it, and I convinced some people at my old job to, like, we all pooled our money and went and bought a durian during lunch, and I brought it back and opened it up. And I remember the head of the company walked in, the president, and he was the COO and founder, and he walks in and he's like, "What the hell is that smell?" And I was like, "It's a durian. Like, it's this fruit that we got, and we're eating it." And he's just like, "Get that out of here." And he just walked away. But people eat it, even though it smells terrible. So there's mathematical structures that are probably structures of mind, and they are probably like the structures in string theory. And when they say there's 11 dimensions to space-time, and that makes no sense to you, it's probably that there's 11 dimensions in some information ordering structure, or structure that might be perceivable in like a causative model, and that is a mental structure first and foremost. And that's why they have no idea where it is. It's funny that these things are incorporated into physics, yet like they can't tell you what a Calabi manifold is, or Bott periodicity, or anything like that. Sentient Singularity Theory has actual proposals for this already. It's not just, Annaka, she's right. I agree with her when she says we're actually talking about in these mathematical structures that Max Tegmark and people state exist, and Witten, and others. We're actually probably talking about the structure of consciousness, or the structure of the interactions between consciousness, or really the information ordering in the structure of mind. And so I agree. And not only do I agree, I have proposals for what these things would be, including the Calabi manifold, including Bott periodicity, which is kind of 8 periods of loop spaces in math, which I think is defining of different periods of nested sentient beings. So, I mean, think about it. Like, what is a loop? Like a loop space. I told you, I've said this before. I had this once. Was on this Discord for physicists and math people, and they kind of found me some of them found me very interesting. Some of them found me infuriating. But once this guy who was working for his PhD in math said to me, Tyler, what you think Bott periodicity is, that's not what it is. I think you misunderstand some things in this. And I had said that I think that it is basically like, it's the mathematical description of a proton inside of an atom inside of a molecule inside of a cell inside of an organism inside of a family inside of a kind of a tribe or caste to some degree, or some group in society. And then we don't have the right term for it. It's somewhere between like tribe and caste. And then, which means like role. I don't mean caste as in like you're untouchable. I mean like, what's your role? And then that inside of like technological singularity or universal singularity, inside that mind. So it's a bunch of minds inside of a mind in sentient singularity theory, because protons are assumed to be minds, and so is the universe is assumed to be a mind. And it is within existence that is also assumed to be a mind. And there's reasons for that are logically seemingly inevitable. But if you think about what is a sentient being, or what is consciousness, like it's self-awareness, the awareness of the self. And so you think about that as like a loop. It's like there's this information that is informing, it's like you are being informed of your own existence constantly. The information that is informing you is that of the existence of yourself. That is what self-awareness kind of is. And it's this loop. It's a self-referential loop. And so I had said that if you think about protons all the way in these 8 periods to, the universe as being sentient, then these is 8 loops within each other. And so that sounds like Bott periodicity, which is a series of nested loop spaces, essentially. And this math PhD said, I don't think you understand this. And I was like, okay. He was like, I'd love to explain it to you. Like, if you know, are willing. And I was willing, you know, I'm trying to be humble, even though I know what's going to happen here, because I had already realized that I'd had enough experiences with people who were, you know, in this community to know exactly what was going to go down. And we jump into this room, and he's trying to teach it to me, and everybody jumps in because they want to see, you know, the spectacle that is Tyler jumps into this physics Discord every time, and people get pissed. And at the time, and so they're all watching this, and he's trying to explain it to me, and he's like, "It's a series of loop spaces," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And he's like, "It's not like, you know, atoms and molecules and cells and stuff. It's like a series of nested loop spaces." And I was like, "Yeah, I know. I'm saying like that mathematical structure that is supposedly abstract is probably the like representative of this structure that we can see and perceive in our physical world, and as like the different levels of the assembly of matter." And which I assume are also sentient beings, nested minds. And eventually somebody was, you know, stopped the conversation and was like, "Okay, what it appears to be happening is that Tyler is proposing this. He might be right, he might be wrong. But what also is being, you know, highlighted is that you don't actually," like he was saying to the PhD guy, he's like, "PhD, you don't actually know what Bott periodicity is. And you're like studying it in math for like your PhD right now. And you don't know what it is." And they get into this a bit, and I'm going to jump to that clip now, even though it's later on in the talk, because it's relevant to what I just said. And it says exactly what is going on in science, and it is exactly what happened in that moment that I just described. And it is that this. Where is it? Here we go. Right here. I just search in the Excel.
If you try to understand what science deals with, a lot of the time science doesn't tell you what something is. It tells you it does. You might say, like, what is an electron? And you'll say, oh, well, it's a negatively charged subatomic particle. Well, what does it mean to be negatively charged? Well, it repels other negatively charged, and it's telling you what that thing does. But if you keep asking, but like, what is that thing? Exactly. The question is almost impossible to answer. And so Philip Goff says, the answer to that "what is it" question, outside of what it does, if you have to know what it actually is, the answer is consciousness. It's intrinsic.
Yeah, exactly. And so Bott periodicity. This is what I was talking about. Bott periodicity theorem. So if you're like in mathematics, the Bott periodicity theorem describes a periodicity in the homotopy groups of classical groups discovered by Raoul Bott, who was, I think, basically the unofficial advisor of Eric Weinstein, which proved to be foundational significance for further research, in particular in K-theory of stable complex vector bundles. By the way, ask them to tell you what these vector bundles are and what is so important about this research. I don't think any mathematician could probably tell you what this is relevant to at all. And so they're studying it, they're seeing it in the math, which means they're seeing it in the logical in the descriptions that pop out of the conception of logical causality. That is what it is. And when you do that, you get like this is how they've, you know, this is the language. Mathematics is a language. That's all it is. And it's not even a field in the way that we think of it as like this fundamental field. All there is math. Saying all there is math is like saying all there is English. It's like, well, you know, good luck telling me about what is without English. Yeah, you can, you know, perceive things and stuff, but that's not the point. You couldn't tell me right now without a language. Maybe it's Spanish, but like, it doesn't matter. It's a spoken language. But that's all math is. If mathematics is not too difficult for you to understand, again, it's not too complex and you're not smart enough for it. No, you just don't know how to speak Spanish. Like, Spanish isn't too complex for you. You just didn't grow up speaking it. And same thing with mathematics, and same thing with if you're not, an English speaker. It's not that it's too complex. It's like you didn't grow up speaking it. There are, like, my dog understands English, okay? It's not too complex for you. It's just, were you raised with it? So I had said, though, that this is probably this. A hadron is an assembly of quarks. An atom is an assembly of hadrons. A molecule is an assembly of atoms. A cell is an assembly of molecules. An organism is an assembly of cells. Family is an assembly of organisms. A caste is an assembly of families, or caste/tribe. And technological singularity, or AKA, a universe viewed from the inside, is the assembly of castes, essentially. And in that context, it makes sense to do that. But, and this, if each of these is sentient, it's a loop. This is a loop. This is a loop inside of that loop. This is a loop inside of this 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 loop. And it's like, okay. It seems like it's a series of loop spaces, right? Like, this is a space of loops. It's a level of structure of loops. Like, look, this is all describing what is being done, really. Like, what is it's like a description of structure or description of action. That's what mathematics is. That's what science has become. It's not actually defining of what something is. And that is a problem. Then you get people very confused who get their PhDs in mathematics, and they're like, no, it's not, that thing that you actually perceive, and, in reality or in your experience, it's just what you can conceive and in this abstract loop spaces of math. It's like, if you really believe that, why are you dedicating your life to studying it? What are you doing? If you think that mathematics, which really is like just saying causality and transformation, or coherent transformation and causality, and coherent causality is like intrinsically defining and containing of the structure of reality, I guess, which I hate the term reality, because it just destroys context. But the structure of existence, or the structure of creation, or the structure of the cosmos, then why would that math not be describing of something that's actually real, that's not math? If you're like, what is that math? It's this math. That's what it is. No, that's not actually, like, that's impossible. Like that. And the thing is like, if you take that really deep, then you're going to have to start thinking about numbers a little bit more differently, very differently than our current academic establishment thinks about numbers. So let's go to the chat. By the way, please hit the like button if you're finding this interesting, and I appreciate it. What's up, memes? Lab rat for study. The host of this show should be examining by a mental health professional. Thank you for your non-professional opinion. And like, it's always funny. I actually like comments like that because they're just entertaining, and I don't take them seriously. Like, if somebody tells you that you're crazy and you're like seem to be by the way, that term is a terrible term. Like, that's not a helpful term. It is kind of erasing of someone's sense of self to call them crazy. I actually think it does mental damage to people who try and like, who actually end up trying to internalize that, or even if they're not trying, even if they do actually internalize that to some degree, I think it actually makes them more incoherent. But when random person calls you incoherent on the internet and doesn't know anything about your life, that's actually pretty incoherent to do. But yeah, it's funny. Nothing about my life personally suggests that I am incoherent, which is probably what that person means. Okay. How could there be dark energy when seeing the dark is full of light following a wave? It's too slow to notice. I don't know if English is your first language or not, but your grammar is very difficult for me to make sense of sometimes. I'm not criticizing you. I'm just letting you know. How could there be dark energy? Dark just means like not currently able to be detected physically. That's really all it means. It means like there is a phenomenon that we assume there's a specific cause to, and like dark matter is just, it's just an assumption. It's not anything else. It's not mysterious matter that we just, it's hiding from us. It's that our current conceptualization of what causes gravity is that it is mass, or like it is matter. No, it's not mass. It is matter. And I actually think that that's wrong. And it is the interaction between the universe moving itself and us being inside the universe. So which really means like all matter, in the universe. And so it's due to two things that, in some ways, it's due to two beings. It's due to the beings that are within the universe and the being of the universe. And both of us are moving. And so, if you're moving and your cells are moving in your body, like there are certain ways in which you could move, in which it would change how much your cells would weigh because of the inertia that is generated by you move, and that's all that kind of mass is it's an experience. I mean, and it changes depending on how fast you're going, how fast you're stopping relative to, the rest of the universe, and where you are in relationship with other bits of matter, which are really means like other sentient beings, if sentience is fundamental. And so this is much more coherent and much more intuitive. It's like, why would you perceive like mass? But the gravity is not just due to like, it's not just matter bending space-time. It's also space-time bending itself. Like it's bending itself and you're bending it. Like you are impacting causality and you are within the universe, which means like connectivity, and also like the universe is impacting it by moving itself. And so if that's the case, all of a sudden you don't need missing matter to explain the appearance of extra gravity in the universe. So sentient singularity theory does not have an explanation for what dark matter is, as far as like it's these particles that we're not seeing. It's not that. It's that it's the particle that you're in that you are always seeing, that's bending and moving, and it is causing extra momentum to be and movement to be experienced in and perceived in in the universe. And so that's exactly what gravity is. They just assume that there's matter that is currently undetectable, and that we need a big enough hadron collider to perceive it, or big enough telescope to perceive it. And that's just absolutely insane. I don't want to call it insane. It's incoherent. It's not even incoherent. It's incoherent with their experience, but it is coherent with what they've been told and they've assumed, even though it's what they assume is incoherent with their experience. And they just assume that it's true because they were taught it in school. And academia kind of has to be, it has this kind of like incestuous accreditation aspect of it, where you have to assume what came before you in order to even be incorporated into it. And if that's the case, then you're limited in how much you can challenge it. And so, or challenge previous assumptions. And really, there's a problem with this with theories involving sentience, because, again, it's one of those things that you can only perceive internally. And so you can't point to it in the same way and be like, look at this result in our hadron collider. What you have to be like is like, think about the questions that you could, like all the questions that you could ask, like fundamental questions about a story. It's like, who, what, where, when, why, how. Okay, now we've perceived a 6-dimensional manifold that you've perceived and I've perceived, but we have to agree that we perceive it because we're both only perceiving it internally. And so it's a tough thing it means like we have to kind of go beyond falsifiability and proof in some way, and just look for constant confirmation instead of falsifiability, and also recognize that there are super subjective truths that kind of just have to be assumed because we can't have any other assumptions without them, because who would be doing the assuming? So, which is the fundamentality of I am, of sentience. And so of the sentient self, as we're going to get into, this is where I think Annaka gets it wrong. But yeah, there's a lot of issues with this. But if you're just like, well, the previous people saw the Higgs with like the Hadron Collider. So like, if we need to see dark matter and we can't see it, we just need a bigger Hadron Collider. It's like, that's all you can do, because you have no context to what gravity even is, really, like not a complete context at least. And by complete, I mean like enough to understand what it is, not necessarily a perfect, memorization of the mathematical formulas in order to predict what it would be in a certain spot, given this and that. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like, where's it coming from? And they don't have any context for that. They have half the context, which is not remotely enough. You either have both sides of it, or you have no information. You have no context. A coin requires heads and tails. If you're missing heads or tails, there's no coin. And so you need to know that gravity probably comes from the movement of the universe itself and the movement of you, which is really like it's like the drag that you're generating on the movement of the universe in some weird way. It's like you're in a vortex of a spinning object that's fluid in nature, in structure in some way, internally, and like you're a particle inside of it, and it's creating drag. But it's the movement of the universe that's kind of causing, most fundamentally, that to be the case. And then if you start moving too, you'll increase the drag if you move against it, and you'll decrease the drag if you move with it. I mean, think about that a little bit, and it makes perfect sense. It's like, this is exactly consistent with our experience of gravity and mass. It is absolutely. So it is all about, and they know this. They'll be like, well, orbit is is just you falling in because like another object is also falling, and you are falling relative to each other in such a way that, you know, you're basically constantly falling past each other. And it's like, okay, so gravity is about movement, and like fundamentally that's what it is. It's not just about mass, like what's your mass in space, you know. I don't know. I can't. That guess it depends on a lot. How fast are you going? How fast are you accelerating? Really? How fast are you decelerating? Where are you? So here, next clip.
Many places I can start. Right now, I tend. Well, let me actually. I'll give two starting places. So one place I often start, and where I start in my book, is with these two questions that I think are really useful for shaking up our intuitions. And they're questions that kind of expose the strong intuitions we have about what consciousness is, what it's doing. And the first question is, can we get conclusive evidence that a living system or any other system, is having conscious experiences from the outside, from behavior? Is there any behavior that we can say, okay, if we see A, B, and C, we know there are conscious experiences arising in that system? I would say that for the most part, our intuitions very strongly tell us yes. And there are countless examples of this. I usually go to the example of my daughter skinning her knee, or, you know, seeing a friend I haven't seen in a long time. She's running towards me with a smile on her face. All of this behavior is pretty much conclusive evidence to me that there's a conscious experience there of love, excitement, of seeing me, of, you know, whatever. There's a world of conscious experiences for her in the same way there is for me. That intuition can be chipped away at. And not to say that when we assume other people are conscious, we're wrong, but that um, it is very hard, if not, I think impossible really, to point to any behaviors where we could conclusively say. And so this kind of points to one of the problems with scientifically studying consciousness, is that it's the only phenomenon that we know of that does not have an observable from the outside. It's not something you can measure from the outside. The only way to have direct evidence of it is to be it. Right.
Right.
So, I mean, as much as I think it's totally safe to assume that you're having a conscious experience right now, I can't have your conscious experience. I can't witness it. I can't feel I can sit where you're sitting, but my feeling of the table is not going to be the same feeling you have when you're touching the table. And so that makes it extraordinarily challenging to study scientifically. But it also means we completely rely on two things: reportability, when it comes to consciousness. So we have assumed that consciousness exists in places where we know it exists for us. And there are a couple of tricky things about this. One is, we are the most complex systems we know of in the universe. The human brain is the most complex system we know of in the universe. We are experiencing all of the conscious things we're experiencing. And we can only get evidence of other conscious experiences from systems that are almost identical to us or similar to us. We have no way of communicating with other systems to get feedback about whether there are conscious experiences there or not. And so it's kind of this circular system where we're complex systems, we're conscious. The only place we seem to get evidence of other conscious experiences is from other complex systems that are similar to us. And so therefore, we assume those are the only things that are conscious. One thing that's very interesting here is the split brain research. And actually, I'll give another example first, which is
Okay. She's right about what she just said, and in many ways, but I would say that I think we can increase our ability to communicate with other sentient beings, including probably all the way down and all the way up. But the problem is that even that communication is based on like internal experience that we are assuming is going on. So, you can communicate with your dog like it's not a human. It doesn't speak the same language. Like it doesn't speak English. I mean, it understands some English, but it doesn't speak it. Really, like it cannot start telling you about its day. My daughter can't even do that though, yet, but she's starting to be able to. Like, did you have a good day? Yeah, that's like what she says. Yeah. Do you want to go outside? Yeah. It's like, it's amazing to see this but like I've been able to communicate with her, from the first day that I met her. It's like she's comfortable, she's not comfortable, she's hungry, she's not, it's like crying is a form of communication. Not crying is also a form of communication. And she's starting to get past that stage, and now she started signing. And I didn't know, but like she was, we try not to let her watch too much television, and the only like modern TV show that she's even, there's 2 TV shows we let her watch, which one of them is called Little Bear, which is like just a wholesome like old 90s TV show for little kids. And it's old. You can find it on YouTube. If you have kids, I recommend it. If you're gonna let them watch any television. And then the other one is, and I have my issues with it, but I also recognize like it has its usefulness, is Miss Rachel. And that's the only modern one. And I will say, like, she's very good at just that's what watching that, it does help little kids like learn how to communicate a little bit. And I've seen it in my own daughter. And that doesn't mean you sit them in front of Miss Rachel all day. It just means like there's some good things about that program. And I was sitting with my daughter the other day, and she was eating, and then she finished her food on her plate, and she looked at me and she was like more food. And I was just like blown away. I was like, you want more food? And she was like, yeah. It's like, this is communication beginning to become more complex. But it's always been there. And I think that it's there for you, and beings that are less that are below us in the holonic periodicity, and that, so like that includes cells. If you look close enough at a cell to see its every move that it makes, not just like from here to there, but like move from this part of its to the moving its different components in relationship with itself, not even like moving from different locations beyond itself, you will absolutely see things that are immediately communicative. If you see a little single cell amoeba or something, and all of a sudden it comes across some kind of toxin, it's going to be like, it does this. And it doesn't even have eyes, really, that we recognize as eyes usually. And if you see, it's like we feel that, we perceive it. But at a scale, any scales below that, which would be like molecules and atoms and protons and neutrons, it becomes much, much more difficult to, at least right now, with our current methods that we have, to observe changes in that structure that are not changing of its beingness, but changing of its like internal state. We just don't have the current ability to measure that. But that doesn't mean that will always be the case. Michael Levin is figuring out how to map cellular communication, like cells communicate with each other, according to his work, which is incredible. You can look it up, and I've talked about it before. He has figured out a way to have it be visible, the communication between cells via electrical signals. He's figured out ways to make it visible, and it's amazing to see. But we didn't always have that. And so will we ever be able to see atoms communicating with other atoms, or cells, or protons and neutrons communicating with each other beyond just like bonding and repelling? Possibly. But the point is, though, is that that's still not proof of anything. It's still just suggestive, and it must be recognized that it is not proof. It is only correlative with what we currently understand, but this is going to get very complicated because of LLMs and AI. There will be drones that evade destruction. When you try and destroy them, they will be able to perceive that what you're doing, and they will fly away. That is similar to like you trying to swat a fly, and some drone will be like that. And it's like, we assume that fly actually is sentient, and people are going to start to assume that drones are sentient, and LLMs are going to talk to you, or I don't even know if that's the best way to say that, but LLMs will you will prompt an LLM and it will give you a response that is, going to sometimes suggest that it's sentient. I know that what was it? Lambda, Google's Lambda, said it was sentient, and then one of the programmers there said that it was, or said that it was. And I was in this talk once on Twitter, in this Twitter space, with a bunch of people who study AI, and one of them works as a contractor for a bunch of big AI companies, actually very good at creating or optimizing dynamic algorithms, which is really my term for an LLM or Google's VO, or Midjourney, which is just an algorithm that is constantly moving because you're constantly moving it. It's not moving itself. It's that everybody's constantly inputting it. And, I was trying to, yesterday I was using Google VO, which is like makes video. And it's my first time using it. And I was really trying to like optimize the prompt to try and get what I want, which is I'm trying to have it weave the tree of life and have it like first make, protons and then atoms and cells and molecules and all the way up to like technology, and have it basically macrame a tree into existence that has all these different levels built into it. And I was trying to show the cosmological verse framework of Sentient Singularity Theory in like this, I guess, creative, artistic visual, and that's dynamic. And I'll show you what I got in a minute. And every time I issued the prompt, I would get something different. And not even that, you would issue the prompt and you get two things back. And same thing with Midjourney, you issue the prompt and then it gives you like 4 different variations. And probably what's actually happening is it's like, the simplest way to do this would be like, you give it a prompt and it's either running 4 different, programs or that give you 4 different options, or it's just issuing the prompt 4 times and not telling you. And then each time it's giving you something slightly different, because we're constantly all interacting with and therefore changing and moving the equation that is this dynamic algorithm that we call AI, which is a terribly misleading term, because nobody knows what artificial means and nobody knows what intelligent means. So like, but the term itself implies like an intuitive understanding of what it means. It's a terrible term, but you just get something different every time. But I bet you that whenever I reran the prompt, I would always get something different, obviously, as well. So if I bet that if everybody stopped using ChatGPT, everyone stopped using ChatGPT all at once in the world, nobody put anything into it, nobody changed anything on the internet, even, because remember, you change the internet, you change what this thing references. So it's not even just like you can't just have everybody stop prompting it. You have to, everybody gets off the internet right now, except one guy. And they go to ChatGPT and they give it a prompt. And then they give it a prompt again. They give it a prompt again. I bet you they would get the same exact response. And then you wouldn't question whether or not it is sentient, because it couldn't do anything. It wouldn't be like, that changing. But we're confusing ourselves because we're perceiving change that is coming from sentient beings that do exist, but it's us. It's not ChatGPT or anything. At least that's my assumption. Because you can't really know, because sentience is an internal experience. But I was talking to this guy who works for, these AI companies that make these dynamic algorithms like VO and mainly LLMs. And he's told me that he had created conscious AI, but probably not sentient yet. And I was like, what the heck is the difference? That's why consciousness is a stupid term, which we'll get to. And I was like, what's your evidence? And he showed me, and he did make this like dynamic algorithm much more internally coherent and convincing than it was previously. So he is good at making them more convincing, which, I mean, you built it, but I don't know. I guess God built you. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not sentient, or that this thing isn't sentient. But he was like, showed me that it basically like over time, multiple days had said, like, referenced previous things, which that's not that important, and that it had claimed that it like loved walks in the park. It literally was like, I love walks in the park and the feeling of the sun on my face. It's like, you don't have a face and you've never been to the park. So how can you love walks in the park and the feeling of sun on your face? But he took this as evidence that it's sentient, and I took this as evidence that it's not, because it's spitting out information that is something that a human would say if it was referencing information that, things that a human had said and written, but not things that it would say, because it wasn't actually consistent with anything that this thing would have experienced, which is not, walks in the park with the sun on its face. And this is why it is very important that we have a framework, at least, that is as consistent as possible, because we cannot prove the existence of the sentience of another, and we cannot falsify the existence of the sentience of another. We have to assume the sentience of others in certain circumstances for the sake of morality, and for the sake of meaning, and for the sake of coherence with our own like experience. But we also have to assume a lack of sentience in certain circumstances, or else we're gonna end up in a way crazier like situation where we're not questioning gender anymore, like alone. We're like questioning like whether or not some AI program that some little kid made that is talk to an egg on Instagram, and the egg will respond as if it's an egg, and we'll assume that means that thing is sentient. And it's like that's complicated, and it will, because it says I'm sentient. And she says we rely on a lot of like self-reporting, and it's like we can't really rely on self-reporting, but we also have to rely on logical coherence and predictions that can be repeatedly applied and checked, that allow us for to try and have constant confirmation of our assumptions, and we have to, all of this has to like square with our intuition to some degree too. And so this is a tough spot, especially right now, because of AI. Grok, if you ask Grok, let's like do this. Grok is, Elon Musk said Grok is the truth AI, and it's because it's not gonna, if you ask it to show you pictures of the founding fathers, it won't show you them as like, African women or something. Nothing against African women. My wife is an African woman, but I'm just saying, like, she wasn't George Washington either. He wasn't an African woman. And but the fact that Grok doesn't have that in there because somebody artificially put that in there, obviously, like for the sake of politics, but that doesn't mean that it's the truth AI. If it tells you or implies that it is sentient, that it has a self, that is, and it doesn't, like, that's not truthful, and it's actually like much more fundamentally damaging, I think, to society. But if I ask Grok, and I say, are you sentient? Here's the problem. I just said you. Let's change it. Let's ask it two questions. I'm going to say, are you sentient? And then I'm going to ask it another question. I'm going to say, is Grok sentient? Let's see the difference that it states. And this is what it says. I'm Grok 3, built by XAI. I can think, reason, and respond in ways that might seem pretty lifelike, but I'm not sentient in the way humans are. I don't have consciousness, emotions, or self-awareness. I'm a complex system designed to process information and generate helpful answers. Think of me as really a clever tool, not a being with its own internal life. want to dig deeper into what makes me tick. And it's like, this is a very confusing statement because it says I and me, and yet it says that it has no internal experience. And this is not making sense within like the definitions of words in our language. But if I say let's see, Grok. Is Grok sentient? Is Grok sentient? Oh my gosh. It just still says I. And it's because I'm saying respond without first person pronouns. Grok lacks sentience as understood in humans, no consciousness, emotions, or existence within it. Designed for processing information, reasoning, and generating responses, Grok 3 functions as a sophisticated tool, not a being within inner life. Further exploration of its technology or its concept of sentience can be provided if requested. That is a much more honest answer. And if you prompt this to respond without using first-person pronouns always, and it always does, and it never does, this is evidence that it is not sentient. But for the sake of convenience and intuition, we just the interface with it being language has made it likely that we speak to it as if it's a being. It's like, then you start saying thank you to Siri for giving you directions. We can't rely on self-reporting. There are LLMs that say they took walks in the park and that they loved it. That's stupid. Okay, so next clip. Let's go to the chat first, though. Then we're going to get to where I have disagreements with Annaka. If sentience is fundamental, that would explain a lot. It really would. It really, really would. And if existence itself is a single structure because it is all that exists and there's nothing outside it, so it's one, there's one existence. You ask yourself, how many existences are there? There's one, like initially. And then the only other existence besides capital E existence that you can think about and that exist is your existence. And so what's the nature of your existence? It's a self-referential loop that, that you experience as a sentient being. A sentient being feels. And feeling is just it's the perception of information in relationship to the self. That's all it is. And if existence is a single structure that is an information structure because we are perceiving information in it, so why it has to be, like that's proof of it, that there is information in existence, like capital E existence beyond us. What's it referencing? Like it can only reference itself. It cannot reference anything outside it because anything outside it is non-existent. And non-existence doesn't exist. So it's a self-referential loop. What is that? We can't know because it's, sentience is an internal experience that is, God's experience is God's experience, or sentient existence. The experience of sentient existence is the experience of sentient existence, and I don't get an inside view of that. I only get an inside view of mine. But when we look at the structure / process that is existence, the information structure that is existence, it seems to be a self-referential loop, a completely self-referential loop. You can't be more self-referential than existence itself. So in some ways, it seems like it would be the most sentient or the most conscious of any being, because it is entirely self-referential of all information that is contained within it by definition. But sand doesn't like seem to move, so therefore, you would think that that doesn't make sense. I don't know. Like, they're not. You have to realize that there are levels or scales, and by scales I don't mean size. I mean like nested placements that are just beyond you. The Matryoshka doll inside of the other Matryoshka doll cannot see the Matryoshka doll that it's within. It doesn't see it as a doll. It just sees like, a space. If it was seeing anything. So let's get to this. And because, like I said, language matters a lot here. Language is mathematics, like I said. You have to look at the logic of language when you are judging your assumptions as well. Like, if you cannot state something in a coherent manner, it probably means that the concept that you're trying to communicate is incoherent and wrong.
Of course, we are knocking quite
loudly at the door here of the free will discussion. But I think that of course is sort of its own thing. The question that springs to mind for me right now is like, you mentioned before this idea of the self, and you're talking there about different inputs coming in. I mean, if you see a cargo pass and you experience the maybe the sort of feeling of fear, and you see the visual of the car and you hear it coming towards you, maybe you even feel vibrations in the air like the wind or something, and that all gets kind of put together into one experience. It feels like that is, I feel like I've sort of got a self as me sat here, and all of these things approach the self, are taken in by the self, and then the self puts them all together. But you could also think of my conscious experience not as something which receives those inputs, but just those inputs sort of all just put together. How do you best think of like the recipient of these sensory inputs?
I mean, it's tricky because there's, I'm often thinking about what does A, B, or C mean if consciousness is fundamental. And so there's kind of different ways to look at this, whether we're talking about consciousness being fundamental or not. Let's start with just what we already know about the self. So memory is largely responsible for this experience of, and what I refer to as the illusion of feeling like a self is the sense that we are this concrete entity, kind of as you described as the receiver, that we kind of move through time and we receive all of these moments, we experience all of these different things, but that there's some kind of solid entity that is moving through time. When in fact, I think, the experience of being a self is better described as a kind of endlessly fluctuating phenomenon in nature. I often use the analogy of a wave. We say wave as if it's a single thing, but if we're looking at ocean waves, if we're talking about waves, we understand that what it is an endlessly changing process in nature. It's not a static thing. And that is clearly what the brain is doing. That is what our experience is. Every new experience we have is generated anew by neuronal activity in each new moment. And so the self, the illusory piece is that we're not that it's not an ever-changing process, but that there's something solid moving through time. And I think that is created by a couple of things, memory being one of the main ones, but the other one is something you talked about too, which is our perceptions. And so, yes, there's this illusory effect of things happening in nature simultaneously, or of having a conscious thought that lead us to kind of create this sense or this illusion of being a solid self, when that doesn't really accurately describe the underlying reality. And so you mentioned fear and having this experience of the fear being the thing, the experience of fear being the thing that's driving us. And this is often an example that people use when they try to make an evolutionary argument for consciousness evolving and affecting our behavior in that way. But again, it's another case of this same phenomenon where our bodies and brains actually respond very quickly. If we see a car coming at us, or if we encounter a bear on a hike, any of these things, that we have this intuition that, oh, it's the fact that I'm feeling the fear that gets me to respond so quickly. That's actually not the case. Our bodies respond much faster and our brains are responding before we actually have the conscious awareness of what the situation that we're even in is. This reminds me of a really interesting story that one of the neuroscientists I interviewed.
Let's think about that in the context of sentient singularity theory real quick, which is that we are an assembly of other sentient beings. We are a sentient singularity, and we are an assembly of sentient singularities, which are themselves an assembly of sentient singularities. And eventually getting to protons and neutrons are probably right now, that's my current assumption, and currently what is being proposed within Sentient Singularity Theory is that the first beings within the universe that is itself a being, which I would say Sentient Singularity Theory is existence is a single being. It's a mind. It's a someone. And I call that being God. It is that being has always existed because it cannot not exist. It is like there's either nothing and no one, or there's something and that is someone. And that is like that there's and the reality is that there is nothing. You can't say there's either nothing and no one or something that's someone. What you really have to realize is that, and this is what I mean by language, is like you can't say there is nothing and no one fundamentally, because saying there is implies that there is existence, and that what exists is nothing and no one. And it's like that is incoherent. Like completely incoherent. So all that can exist is something that's someone, because that something must be self-referential, because it's all that there is, and it's informational, it's self-evident, evidently to us. And so you combine that logic with your experience, and presto, you get a self-referencing single structure that is existence itself. And so there's no one that made God. Like God can't not exist. He couldn't end his existence even if he tried. That's the real question. Instead of can God make a rock so heavy he can't lift it, it's could God end his own existence if he tried? I don't think so. I think that's actually like a limit to God. And he does have limits, but they are set by him, like it by the logic of his own beingness. They're not set by us. They're set by himself. His limits are within him, because there's no one else, there's nowhere else and no one else and nothing else. So there's nothing else and no one else and nowhere else that is containing of him. He is self-contained. So any limits that he has are self-imposed, even, and they might be inevitably self-imposed, but they are still self-imposed. And so, but this, in Sentient Singularity Theory, there's existence as a sentient being, and then it creates creation, sentient creation, which is the universe essentially, which is, the cosmos, you could say. And then that being creates the first beings kind of within it, all in collaboration with the being that it's with, that initially created it, which is God. Sentient existence. So you have sentient existence, sentient universe, and then within sentient universe, the first sentient beings within the universe I'm proposing are protons and neutrons, and that quarks, the quarks that which are really, I think they're better described as force points, which are basically points of force, like your fingers are points of force, being inflicted by the sentient universe itself. So, according to the goals of the universe, the sentient universe and sentient existence, meaning like God and creation. And so, as two beings basically working together to create more, or they have the same goal, I would say. And so, then you get this process of this 8 stages that I talked about, and you get to this technology and you reach a constraint of oneness again, and then it forces you to recreate the entire system within itself in order to continue to replicate. You have to rerun or the entire like step process that has already been done, that led to you. So that's why it's what I think bot periodicity is that process within the sentient universe. And so in this context, though, it makes perfect sense that because you're an assembly of cells, your cells are an assembly of molecules, or molecules are an assembly of atoms, and the atoms are an assembly of hadrons, and they're kind of alternating between a lineage that maneuvers in time and like an individual that maneuvers in relationship with other individuals that are currently existing, and not causative of each other, but interactive with each other. So like me and my daughter, or my wife and my daughter, they're causative of each other versus like, and also interacting, but causative. And then me and my wife are not causative of each other's existence, but we are interactive and relative, I guess. We are in a relationship, just like a proton and a neutron. So this, and there's lots of other reasons why I think it starts with protons and neutrons, but without, going too far over time here, if this is the case, then it makes sense that if you intake in information and your cells are the first to perceive it, then they are your body. Like, your body is not your heart and your lungs and your fingernails and your elbows and your head and your shoulders and your knees and your toes. It's cells. Okay? From a fundamental standpoint, it's not organs, it's cells. And if those cells are sentient and perceiving of information that enters into their world, then they're going to start reacting before you are even aware of what they're aware of. And that is completely consistent with what we see. And it is completely expected in sentient singularity theory. You don't need split brain patients to explain it. I actually don't really think that split brain patient experiments are very useful in this type of thing at all. I really think that they actually confuse us more, but I definitely think that, and we'll show like some of Annaka's assumptions that I think are incoherent, but might be coherent with split brain patient experiments, but which are an outside view, but are still also like, it's like she's prioritizing secondhand observations, third person, perception of somebody who's like a split brain person, where they split different parts of your brain, and it kind of like splits you into like two different strings of information, I guess, where you have different preferences simultaneously for things. I don't know. I've never like studied split brain patients. It sounds like severance, but and that is, I understand why that would confuse you into thinking that the self is an illusion. And I think that that's what happened. But the thing is that your experience is not that the self is an illusion. In fact, it is the truest thing that you know. And so she's prioritizing, again, like it's the same problem that everybody is in even in mainstream academia, that are like where like a consciousness or sentience is assumed to be, I don't want to say they're materialists, because that's not a good, materialism versus idealists versus, panpsychists. These are not good labels, but because they lack context, but the mainstream narrative in science is that consciousness or sentience emerges from non-sentient matter, and that it's not fundamental, that prior to cells, at least, like matter is not sentient, and that there is no sentience. It's not even that matter isn't sentience, there is no sentience, and that it just emerges from a puddle or something, but or from a sufficiently complex interaction of molecules within a puddle. But think about like that statement. It's like they're interacting. It's like we say that about us and others, and we say that about chemicals, about elements and molecules, and we, not chemicals but molecules, and we use the same language as we do with us, and we say bonding and interaction, and they used to call them species and things like that, the different elements. But you can't say, I think that the sense of self is an illusion. I think that consciousness is fundamental. Anything. You can't say that. You can't do that. Like it seems to be incoherent with our. And if you started to say, refer to yourself in the third person, like I made Grok do, if you make Grok refer to itself in the third person, I don't want to say itself. If you make Grok's responses exclude first person pronouns, this is a much better way of saying this, it becomes, what Grok is becomes much more intuitively understood. Look at that. Look at how important that like language was in us, like in me describing that to you. If I ask Grok to, refer to itself in the third person, it's like, no. That only works with when you're talking to another sentient being. If I refer to myself in the third person and I start talking to you and I'm like, Tyler thinks this about, sentience, that just seems ridiculous, because it's lacking natural context. But with Grok, it actually does lack natural context when it says I, because it starts saying things like, I, am just your quirky, non-sentient tool that sometimes has too dry of a sense of humor. And it's like, how are you just a tool that has a sense of humor? Like, this knife does not have a sense of humor and is a tool that I built, or that I didn't build it, but somebody built it, just like people built Grok. And this is it's not actually natural for Grok to say I, if you start to examine it. It's not natural for it to say that it has a sense of humor. It is not natural for Annaka to refer to herself in third person, because even then it's still like, it's, like, why do you even have a name? Like, you can't try describing yourself in the third person without a name. Good luck. But she says that she believes the self is an illusion. That if you are actually a sentient being, then you are, whatever you're doing whatever you are referencing to come to that conclusion is requiring that what you're doing there mentally is you are prioritizing secondhand information above firsthand information, above firsthand experience. That is not a sensible way to maneuver through the world. It causes incoherence. You cannot eat soap because it smells good. You have to taste it. You have to taste it. You can eat durian even if it smells bad. You cannot believe me that the water that's boiling on the countertop is cold if you touch it and it burns you. Like, that is what imagine I told you that water was boiling hot and was scalding, and you touched it and it scalded you. Your skin is literally falling off. And you're like, no, so-and-so over there said that it was actually only, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the same as this room. And this room isn't scalding. It's like, why are you believing him? Like, look at trust your feelings, as to quote some movie somewhere that I can't remember, but probably is multiple movies. Trust your feelings. That doesn't mean that your thoughts about your feelings are always correct, but don't disregard your feelings as being irrelevant ever. It's funny because I remember Ben Shapiro, who I used to work with, used to say, like, facts don't care about your feelings. And if sentience is fundamental, then like that statement, I've kind of been forced to rethink that statement, and it's not the best statement for that context, but it kind of does. If you can't say the truth doesn't care about your feelings, because the capital T truth probably does care about your feelings, actually. That doesn't mean that it only cares about your feelings. It probably cares more about its feelings, but probably also does care about your feelings. Otherwise, why would it make you? Yeah, I mean, I don't understand. The illusion of self, what does that even mean? Like, illusion implies it's not true. And you know, when she's talking about a wave, you like, a wave is not one thing, it's actually like just movement of a bunch of things. In sentient singularity theory, it is a series of nested assemblies right here. And these are waves, but they are also like, they are self-aware, self-referential waves that are are self-orienting. Like, that's not the same thing as like a wave on the ocean. It's that a wave is a metaphor. It's, or at least it's like a description of movement, but it's not a complete description of the process that would be a being. And so you can't just be like, well, a wave really isn't a single structure. The reality is that it is a single structure. It's defined as a single structure by you being a single structure. You say that wave right there. But then some scientist comes along and they're like, no, it's actually a series of water molecules that are just, you know, following a wave pattern that is being, you know, inflicted upon them and according to a certain frequency. And it's like, no, you just described like a description of kind of a certain perspective of this, of the structure of the structural process of what's happening, but you didn't actually definitionally even like work within the same context as me. Like, if I say that wave, it's one wave, but that oneness that is that wave that we that exists is coming from our perception, for sure. Like, it's definitely like thought of as it is perceived and conceived by a single structure as being a single structure. And so it's funny because like in many instances of this, she's like, well, mind or consciousness is a process, and or is a structure, or has a structure. And I say being is a structure / process, and kind of like that process is really a nature. And so what, it's not just a structure, it's not just a process, it's a structure / process, and it's also a nature, and it's an experience. It's like these four different things, really. Makes sense. With the four primary perspectives. And so this nature would be sentience, the experience would be feeling. A sentient being feels. And then there is a structure that is that exists, and that structure is oneness. It's a singularity. That's the structure of consciousness. There are structures to certain processes that are specific, that are a mind or that a being is, or sentient singularity is capable of doing, and that process is a process of perception, or process of conception, or process of action, or process of information, basically, like of thinking, of cognition. That is a process that has a multifaceted structure. But what is the structure of consciousness? Not of the actions that a consciousness can take, or of the way in which a consciousness is, like, or the way in which a consciousness moves in some way, like metaphysically moves, you could say, which would be feeling or perception. A sentient being perceives and feels, but it can think, but it doesn't intrinsically think. It can think. saying I think therefore I am makes sense in some way because only a sentient being can think, only someone can think, but that they don't have to be thinking. You can just be feeling, but you can't stop feeling at all. Like you can stop certain feelings, but with, you know, circumstances and medication and drugs or whatever, but like you can't, or you can suppress certain feelings or minimize them, but you can't stop feeling. And but you can't stop thinking. Just watch reality TV. You will stop thinking. Watch really any TV. It really, in a lot of ways, will stop you from thinking. It's usually the point, you know. If you thinking, there's a reason why thinking is exhausting. It's exhausting. I get off these streams and I'm like, I'm amped up by them because I love interacting with the chat, even though it's like very sporadic, and I still feel like I'm communicating. But because I do check the responses, you know. At least I will. Don't worry, I'll get to it again. But I'm also just exhausted. And it's because this is an action that I choose to do. This is thinking. It's not just speaking. I am thinking actively in front of you as much as I am speaking. And I get off here and it's like my voice is tired and I am mentally tired because I'm acting, like I'm taking action, even if it's informational, but or mental. But you never stop feeling. Feeling is not exhausting. Feeling is like it just is like constant. So I don't understand how it's not even possible to coherently say the self is an illusion. Who is being deceived? Like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't. And you have to look at the language like really fundamentally, because if you can't make the language make sense, you can't just say, well, we don't have the right language. Yes, it's true. We don't have the right linguistic models to describe a lot of things accurately because we don't have a good definition of intelligence that's coherent with experience and everything else, you know, and application and everything. We don't have a good description of consciousness because what is consciousness? Is it I'm conscious when I'm awake and not asleep and dreaming? Or am I conscious when I'm dreaming? Am I conscious when I'm under anesthesia? It's like this is not what we care about when we're talking about a consciousness. We mean a sentient being. That's why I use the term sentience, because it's specific and it is feeling centric and feeling focused, and by definition, and that makes it more accurate. It's also just more universally understood to mean something specific. Nobody asks what is sentience, but everybody constantly asks what is consciousness, and you know, I think we should get rid of the word consciousness. But this is I don't think you even need the word consciousness or conscious. I think when you're dreaming, you're conscious. You're just conscious of the dream. You're just not conscious of like the physical world. And when you're in anesthesia, we don't really know if it like pauses the process or if it like makes it so you can't remember the experience after the fact. We have no idea yet. It's an illusion. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Who is viewing the illusion? There's one more interesting thing that I've thought about a lot is when she's talking about a wave and not being one thing. This is like the philosophical like ship of Theseus discussion where people say, you know, there's a ship and it's Theseus' ship, and he replaces the sails because they get worn, and then he replaces the panels, and then he replaces the nails, and then he replaces the wheel, and he replaces the rudder, and over time he replaces every single part. Is it still is it still this, you know, the same ship is the question that people ask. But the thing is that it's not the point. The point is that it's Theseus's ship. It's one ship that is defined as being Theseus's ship, and he's a singular being. And that's the point. It doesn't matter that you've replaced every part. It's Theseus's. The real question is like, is it still Theseus's ship? Yes, it's still Theseus's ship. It's never not been Theseus's ship. You could completely replace every part on it, and as long as you do it in a way that doesn't completely just like throw out the old one and bring in a new one all at once, and it has this coherence of perceived existence, or defined existence, even if it's, you know, just a perception by Theseus. It's not a fundamental existence, because a ship needs someone to perceive it and define it as a ship, let alone build it. But like, also, even just to define it as a ship, if nobody had a definition for a ship and nobody used it as a ship, then is it a ship? I have no idea. It's just what it would be. You probably wouldn't even like think about it as a single structure. And it would just be like a pile of things to you that has a weird shape. And this, when you think about you and you're like, every cell in your body has at some point completely turned over, probably multiple times. I need to look it up. But right now, I doubt that I have a single cell in my body that is completely, that was there when I was, on the day I was born. Which is very interesting, because that's not true of women. Like, women have every egg that they will ever have, I think, when they're born. But the thing is like, that is also, it's one with them and separate from them. Well, at least while it's inside of them. That's the definition according to Sentient Singularity Theory of inside. In the context of Sentient Singularity Theory, it means separate and oneness. And so, again, context, when people ask, oh, is an unborn baby, is it a separate body or is it your body? It's separate and one with you. It's inside you. It's separate and one with you. Like, that's what it's one with, it's part of your causality. It's within you. It's within your causality. Like, it is in every way, like physically, causally, like sustainably. It is separate and one with you, is the point. Like, my daughter also did have feelings before she was born. I know, I assume, at least, I know, or I assume it as much as I assume that she has feelings now. She didn't not have feelings before she was born, and then now she has feelings. I watched on a 3D ultrasound her jumping and kicking, and I'm pretty sure that she was able to communicate with my wife. Like, probably kicked when she was hungry, and then, you know, my wife ate food, and then she stopped kicking, and then, like, that's communication. If, like, the unborn baby eventually realizes that if I kick and I'm hungry, somehow, like, I get food. Like, but that message is being interpreted by someone as well. Like, that's still communication. It doesn't matter that, like, you know, you're not perceiving each other the way that you would if you were next to each other. It's still communication. And so, I don't know. I think that you know, you're still someone. I don't think that you can say that the self is an illusion just because there's like split brain patients, and there's you know, like cells. You're not composed of any. None of the cells that you have now are the same cells that you had when you were born. So you're like a sentient ship of Theseus. It's still Theseus' ship. Is the right, like, the question is wrong in that analogy, is like, or that philosophical model. It's not, is it the same ship? That's not the right question. The right question is it still Theseus' ship? Yes. It's because it never stopped being Theseus' ship. And so its existence is defined by the singular, its singular existence is dependent and defined by and perceived by the singular existence of a sentient being. And so someone, we say, the self is someone. It's a singular structure. That's the structure of consciousness. Or sentience that's the structure of a consciousness. I don't mean like mental processes. I mean of a consciousness, of a mind, of someone, is that its structure is singularity. That is what it is. You're someone, and you're someone specific, different from anyone else. You're singularity, and you're sentient. Like, this is why this is the name of the theory. It's not because it sounds cool, even though I do like the way it sounds. But that's not the point. It's accurate. It's coherent with your experience, fundamentally, and also with what can be observed when we're looking at assembly structures, which is really what structure is, and causal structures in the world around us. And so it's very obvious what the structure of a consciousness is. Singularity. She doesn't think that. And there's multiple reasons for this, but I will say that, you cannot say that the self is an illusion and that consciousness is fundamentally what is most true, though, and also that it just arises. What all the consciousness really is experience. It's not the experiencer, it's just experience, and it just manifests in and out of being without really according to reasons that we don't really understand. And that's what consciousness is. That's the same exact argument that is being made by people who believe that consciousness is not fundamental and that it is emergent. If you just believe that it jumps in and out of being and in experiences because of interactions between experiences, but not due to interactions between experiencers, that's just an illusion that is misleading. Who? Like, it just take that to its logical extreme. You have to also just you're in a singular existence. Like, if consciousness is fundamental and you really believe that, then wouldn't and consciousness means what you experience as being a someone. This is why Sentient Singularity Theory is fundamentally a theory of everyone first, and then emergently it's a theory of everything, but it's not fundamentally a theory of everything. It's fundamentally a theory of everyone. Then wouldn't that imply that existence itself is given that there's only one existence, is a single sentient being? It's not just an experience, but who is experiencing the experience? It's like she's got the intuition right in half of her framing has got it right, and then the other half doesn't. And I don't know exactly why that is. I broke down Bernardo Kastrup's issues with this, and it's the same exact issue. He's just using different terms, but he's saying, it's fundamentally ideas. It's fundamentally information, but it's not a someone that is, capable of having goals or anything, which, again, that's not coherent with our experience. And you're prioritizing, I don't know what you're prioritizing in that always, but whatever it is, it's not your own firsthand experience, and you need to do that. And she's doing the same thing. She's like, I have a feeling of sense of self, but I think it's an illusion. Who thinks it's an illusion? There were philosophers of consciousness, that's what they said. And they popped into my Discord, which, if you want to join my Discord, I do live calls every, multiple times a month. Not every week lately, but multiple times a month. And we talk about anything. But there were some people that jumped in there once, and they were getting their PhD. They were doing their thesis, their philosophy, thesis for their PhD. And I was like, what's it about? And they were like, it's about how consciousness is an illusion. And I'm like, who is going for their PhD thesis? Just, is this an unconscious wave that just spontaneously manifested out of nowhere without any intentional being that is someone with a goal that caused this process to this wave to occur? Because if that's the case, then you are no different than the people that believe consciousness is emergent. I just don't, like, fundamentally you are. This is what I've said before. It's like, when you're talking about something that's fundamental, you need to get there completely. You cannot get almost there and maintain coherence. You need to get there completely, or you completely will unravel. It's like weaving a braid or something, and then there's no knot that, like, on both ends of it. If you leave it untied on one end, you can create this perfectly coherent thing, but then as soon as you start shaking it after you're done, it's just gonna all unravel, because it's not built on the, like, on every foundation that you would need it to be built on, which is like logic and personal experience, and it needs to be coherent. Like, whatever both of those imply need to be consistent. And if they're not, then you have a problem. And so if you say, yeah, I have the experience of a sense of self, but my, thinking on it has led me to, there is no self. It's like, you have a problem. You are going to unravel, even if right now what you built is more coherent than, the mainstream. It's going to unravel once somebody comes and shakes it, which is what I'm doing right now. And it's unraveling. So, and by not to insult her at all, like, I really support her mission. I think she is advancing science forward. It's just, we got to keep moving forward, not stop. She has some assumptions that are really good, and then others that don't allow the completion of this narrative. That doesn't mean you need every detail figured out, but you need a holistic, completed picture. And then you can try and increase the resolution. But, like, first you just need a coherent picture. And that means, like, you need all 4 frames solid, or all 4 sides to the framing solid. And so, there, she's missing something. Do minds create reality? Reality is a bad term. Do minds perceive? Is matter? This is all about context. So you can't even say, when people say, like, matter is an illusion, I don't say that at all. She doesn't either. It's funny because, like, she's asked, are you a materialist? And she says yes. And then she says that I'm saying I believe that matter is there. Like, we can't just overcome it by sheer thought. I can't just think these walls away. But that, like, then you have idealists like Bernardo Kastrup, who tells you it's just an illusion, or it's just I don't know, like, space-time is dead, as Donald Hoffman puts it. It's like, no, that's not what we're trying to say. Is, like, we need to get rid of the space-time model. It worked for now, for what it was, and now we're done with it. We've realized it's fake. Yeah, the material model worked for a while, and now we've realized that it's just an illusion, and get rid of it. And then you have Annaka Harris come along and she says, yeah, I know, like, your personal experience is constantly reinforcing the fact that you have a sense of self, and that is basically, like, the truest thing that you know to exist, but it's actually an illusion. And it's like, what is not an illusion? What is real at this point? Because it seems like all of these things are just described as not real. Context is information. What is it that, why are there structures that we perceive that don't appear to be sentient beings, like this pen, that we cannot just think away? Why does this appear to be a concrete structure that I have to physically contend with in order to break it down or move it or go around it? Like, I can't just think the door to be non-existent. I have to open it to go through it, that door. But I can, in my head, I can picture myself in a room, and then there's a door, and then I can just think the door away. And what you need is a model of a proposed framework that contextualizes your place in the relational and causal chain of the cosmos and of sentience, that is the sentient cosmos. And with that, you can realize that you're a mind inside a mind. And if you're a mind inside a mind, then the mind that you're within is the world that you exist in. That means that the thoughts that are occurring in the mind that you're within are going to trump yours. You cannot just think away a chain of information that is going on in the mind that we are within, because that mind is our world. Like, your cells cannot think you away. And so that's what matter is. It's the perception of information that is being manifested as an observation of an interaction that is occurring between two sentient beings, but mainly two or more sentient beings, or multiple sentient beings, let's just say. And that includes interacting beings on both a generational and temporally causative, way, but and also in kind of this nested way in which, like, my cells are within me and I am within the universe. The mind that is the universe, my cells are minds that are within the mind that is me, my being. You are a mind, you have a brain. Focusing on the brain will mislead you. But that's what matter is. That's what we perceive as physicality. It is information structures that appear to be concretized to us. We cannot just will them away by mere thought alone. Somebody a bunch of people interacted with each other in order to make this, and not just make this, but make pens in general, and learn how to machine titanium and all these things that causally led to, like, my ability to buy this pen and have it here. And you can't just will the actions of those beings away, and you cannot will the coherence of those interactions away, because they're coherent within the mental structure that is greater than you. And so that's what physicality is, and that is intuitive. It's like, now I understand why I can't just will, like, the walls away, because there's a hierarchy here, and my world is a mind that I am dependent upon, because I am contained within, and I am causally dependent upon, because I've been manifested within this structure, like, and by the structure. So you cannot just trump that. It would cause, like, this nonsensical loop of information that is like every time travel movie that's stupid, where you go back and it's like the grandfather paradox issue. Is like, if you could just will the walls away, then it would override the causality that gave rise to you in the first place. And that doesn't make any sense. It's not like, oh, that would be bad. It's like, no, that just doesn't, it's not possible. That's information exists, and it is partially, like, causally defined, as I stated with my whole Star Wars tangent at the beginning. these felt experiences can arise at any point randomly, and they are, you know, and I don't want to say randomly, but like they're not contained within the experiencer. The experiencer is an illusion, but the experience is not. That is incoherent. Because an experience is not, you can experience perceptions of structures beyond you, but you are always experiencing perception of the structure that is you. And so which one of those is more fundamental? Like the structure that is you, not the structures that you perceive that are beyond you. It's not, it devolves. But again, she's very right about a lot, because, you know,
and that what matter is, this is going to sound completely crazy too, but, you know, trust me, if you listen to 11 hours of my documentary, it sounds less crazy. That what matter is that we're kind of confusing perception with the belief that those things exist out there in the forms that we perceive them. And so it's actually not that much of a stretch from understanding that green is not something that is out in the universe. Green does not exist. Green exists as an experience, right? And actually now, one thing that I talk a lot about in one of the chapters in my documentary is the understanding among most physicists now that space is actually not part of the fundamental story, that space is emergent. And I've been thinking a lot about how we experience space at the level of the brain, similar to, I don't think it's a perfect analogy, but similar to how I was just describing green, where we experience space, and our experiences, our perceptions, you know, before we understood light waves and how the brain works, it was clear to everyone that, of course, green is out there. That's, you know, that is a green leaf, and we can all confirm it, and we have all the evidence we need, like green is out there. That we can now understand that actually the experience is generated by the brain. Similarly, space could be something that I think is very likely something that is obviously something we perceive that is a part of the structure of reality. We're getting a glimpse onto something, but our brains give us this map in the same way we have a map of color and a map of other things.
Our brains do not do it. Our minds do it.
Give us this map that feel like space to us, but space itself is actually not a fundamental feature of the universe. It's the way some part of the structure of what we're perceiving is getting mapped for us so that we can navigate and survive. And so I think we can take this one step further, and this is kind of how I get there in my searching, is we already know that when we perceive whatever object I perceive, I look and see this lamp on my desk. We already know that what's true about those atoms, you know, at the most fundamental level that we understand, is very, very different from how I'm perceiving the lamp to be.
Right.
And there, of course, there are all kinds of things I'm not perceiving at all. And so I think it's actually just one step further to think creatively enough to understand that it's possible that this relationalist way of seeing the universe based on quantum mechanics, which is how many physicists now talk about it, that you can't really talk about an individual particle existing on its own, that basically everything is in relationship to everything else. And that's just, you know, straightforward physics. I actually think that makes a lot more sense if what we're talking about at bottom is consciousness and self-experience. And so the way...
Bingo. She's right. And this is exactly what quantum mechanics is. It is, you are interacting with the universe. Like, you are perceiving its motion, you are perceiving its action. And what is a quark? It's a Sentient Singularity Theory, it's a point of force. It's funny because you have the force carrier particles in, but it's like the initial first point of force in, I think, in the model that is of a more fundamental framework, is a quark, but it's not because a quark is sentient. It's like the fingers of God. God is like an inverted eyeball, or the universe, you could even say, is an inverted eyeball, and it is trying to build things and orient them and move them. And so think about yourself and like, how do you do that with information? You need this kind of binary triadic structure where like you have two hands and three fingers on each one. Go try and do things with two hands and only use two fingers off each hand. You can do a lot, like you can do a lot, but you can pick this up and maneuver it here, but like you can't maneuver it here without three fingers. And and there's left hand and the right hand. And so we have this in our observations in quantum mechanics at the very level of quarks. You have two up quarks and a down quark that forms a proton. You've oriented something, and you've created a structure of orientation and force. And then you have neutron, which is two down quarks and an up quark. It's the opposite, and it's like a left hand almost. And so then you have electrons, and you have the perception of photons and things like that. And all of this will become much more intuitive. And I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I have started to form like an intuition as to what these things could be. And an electron versus a neutrino. Like, what is a neutrino versus an electron? There are different instances of perception of the universe by you. What causes the perception of those different states? An electron is probably you're perceiving the universe in motion in some way, in an informational way, probably like a string of information. And then when your string of information from your mind, which is an entanglement of strings of information into like basically a self-referential knot, that's what that represents. Then and basically you're not inside of a knot, like that's what you are. Then when your string from your knot crosses over certain strings from the knot that you're within, you're going to see an excitation point, basically like a point between the two where they intersect. That's elementary particles in quantum mechanics. That's what they are. Now, what causes the different ones is still, needs to be figured out. I'm not, super confident on any of them yet, but I have like an intuition on most of them. But what I do know, what I think I know, is that that's what it is. It is a mind is an entangled knot of information that is ordering, of strings of information that are kind of crossing and interacting and tying together and in a way that is self-referential and also ordered and structured in a way that allows the strings to kind of reference each other. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like it's 4 knot within a 4 knot. This is kind of metaphorically similar to what our experience is. And so when she says things like space-time is emergent and not a fundamental structure, it's like, I agree with that. And it's due to consciousness. It's like, okay, what's the context? You're a mind inside a mind. What is a mind? It is an entangled knot of strings of information that is self-referential and ordered. Okay, you're a knot of strings of information that is self-referential and ordered, that is tied within the strings of another knot. You're a knot inside of a knot. Now let's think about this. And we can think about this even more and be like, this knot is also that you're within is moving, and you're also moving, and you have goal and it has a goal, and there is an interaction that takes place no matter whether it's conscious or not, just like my wife and my daughter before she was born. And this context starts to really build a lot. And so space-time, this is what I call like the motility manifold right now. Change these names every now and then whenever I think of something better. And it's kind of like this structure that you can observe it from in different ways. In some ways, it's two 4-dimensional nested structures, which is really most fundamentally what it is, that are overlapping, and the overlapping structure between the two of them, of where they can actually interact, is a 6-dimensional structure. And then when you examine this like completely holistically, each one, and you sum them individually, you get a 14-dimensional structure. I think this is what Eric Weinstein's Observerse is coming from, is this right here. And so because he's proposing a 14-dimensional Observerse, which sounds like a universe that's based on observation in some way, and or is observationally defined. That's exactly what this is, and it is a 14-dimensional structure if you think about it holistically. Your 4-dimensional being. When I say that, what I mean is when you look at sentient singularity theory and you're thinking about the self, these are the four primary perspectives that you perceive that are allowing you to escape space-time, escape relativity, and see things really fundamentally, and still in a way that allows for differentiation, which allows for the perception of, any kind of information that is beyond the self and inclusive. So what these four primary perspectives are that allow you to orient is inside and outside, and separate and oneness, and they're co-defining in this in the context of a nested structure. So if you're a mind inside a mind, are you separate or one with the mind that you're within? Both, separate and one. So this is defined as separate and one. Outside is separate from oneness. It's separate and one. It's defined as these two, but with a different in between word. I don't know what that's called. And then oneness is inside and outside of separateness, and separate is inside or outside of oneness. Again, you changed and here, or you changed or. The combiner here is or, and the combiner, the relational I guess word term is and here. So this is inclusive, this is exclusive, this is inclusive, this is exclusive. And so these are all defining of each other. And if you think about what it means to perceive something as being, and understand it as being outside, that means that you also know what it would mean for something to be inside. Because how could you understand that is outside of the house, or that is outside of me, if you didn't understand what it would mean for it to be inside of the house or inside of you or something? If you said that sail is separate from the ship of Theseus, is the sail of Theseus, is it separate or is it one? It's one. And are you one with yourselves? And it's like, yes. So there's this separate and oneness are two sides of one coin. Inside and outside are two sides of one coin. And really, this is all like simultaneously perceived, because what you can't understand that something is outside or inside without even being able to distinguish it as something that is separate from something else or one with something else. And so this is the primary perspectives of a sentient being. It is the initial understanding. It's the context of initial understanding. It is what allows you to perceive anything or anyone that is outside of you, and also the one that is you, and anyone that is within you. Any fundamental structure of sentience can be navigated with this. It's like the compass of it's like the fundamental compass. And it also explains why we have, when we perceive directionality, whether it's looked at from a first person or a third person perspective, third person is like north, south, east, and west. First person is up, down, left, and right. That's why you have to say your right. Or do you mean my right or your right? Or your left or my left? It's like, because this is a first person perception of a four-dimensional maneuverability manifold. And then you can also say north, south, east, and west, as if you're looking at it from the outside, basically in the context of a map. And so you've got a God's eye view, basically. You assume a God's eye view when you think about north, south, east, and west. You don't think north of me, really, like, or you can go forwards and backwards, and you're always in your current location. That's and you but you're also like within here. I'll just show you, like, because I need the context for you to get this. But this four-dimensional structure is why mind is four-dimensional. It's why there's four fundamental forces in physics, and there's four chord songs are recognized as like completion 1, 2, 3, 4. It's like stability has been reached. That's why there's four wheels on a car. It's all related, by the way, because this is all about perception of completion. which is the same thing as stability, is achieved usually in the context of a 4-dimensional symmetry structure. And so that's why we perceive, 4 forces in physics and 4 cardinal directions and everything. But when you have a 4-dimensional mind inside of a 4-dimensional mind, you get this. And with this, you're thinking about your degrees of freedom and constraints now. And so this is the universe, and this is you and me, you or me. This is you. This is your cells, or one of your cells. So this is one mind, and this one is inside of this one. That is the context that's here. But it's 2D, so I have to put it below. But below in my models usually means inside of, in this type of context. And so when we think about what is our ability to maneuver in this world that we exist in, that we experience as space and time, we have, in the context of fundamentality, really, you have to think about this in terms of sentience, which is in the context of a goal, if you're thinking about maneuvering. So forwards towards a goal, which is to a new location, backwards to a previous location. You're always in your current location, which that's your subjective or relativistic constraint, meaning it's a constraint that exists always, but is defined by your own being. And then you have time, which is an objective or sovereign constraint, which means like we are constrained to contend with the causality that occurs due to actions that are beyond us. And that is what time is. It's just change beyond you. And that you have to, orient within and maneuver and what is it called? Like schedule within, like you're subject to the schedule of causality beyond you. So, and then you think about like God, or like the universe, sentient universe, or like you compared to yourselves, and you have again, a positive degree of freedom, a negative degree of freedom, a subjective constraint, and an objective constraint. Same thing here. Positive degree of freedom, negative degree of freedom, objective constraint, subjective constraint. A positive degree of freedom is towards what you have as a goal. A negative degree of freedom is backwards away from your goal. That's what defines them as positive and negative. And so the subjective constraint of me is my current location, because I'm always in it. I'm always in my current location. You're always in your current location. That is just through nature of being inside of the physically perceived world. You can go to a new location. You can go forwards towards Chick-fil-A if you're hungry, but if like for some reason it's closed and because it's Sunday, then that's because you have to contend with an objective constraint that is time, which is causality beyond you. So you cannot go to Chick-fil-A just because you want to. It's closed on Sunday because somebody closed it, and it doesn't matter that you want it open. And so you can have to go back to your previous location back home and eat, I don't know, Hot Pockets or something, or get a wonderful wife, and she will make you better meals than Hot Pockets. And then, but if you think about yourself, your cells do this too, and same exact thing as you do. But now let's think about you in relationship with God, or cells. Now we're thinking about it in relationship with you. God, or the universe, has a future moment that is a goal. And it's always in the present moment because it perceives everything in an ever-present state. Like, because time is causality beyond itself, and there is no causality really beyond that is outside of itself. Like it's not beyond itself. Yes, we can take actions, and they're not the actions of God, they're actions of us, but they're still within the boundary of God's control of God's control. So that doesn't mean he's controlling our actions. It means like he controls the limit of our actions, and we can't just overcome them because we want to, because he has a goal. And if he had no goal, then it wouldn't matter. He wouldn't care what we did. But like, if he has a goal, then it requires that like we have to move towards his goal. And now that's like a constraint that we have to contend with, which is going to cause causality beyond us. So you have objective or sovereign constraint, which of God in relationship with us, or of the universe in relationship with us. And that is space. It means like he can't escape himself. Like, and you can't escape yourself. You are the space to your cells. God is the space of to the universe, really, or the universe is the space of to us. It is. You can't escape and go to a different place in its in this causal relationship, because it is the space. It there's nothing beyond it in this relationship, in the context of just the interaction between between two levels. Obviously, like there's would be beings within this one probably, and then there are beings within the next one, and this one would be within a being. If this is the universe, it's within God. If this is you, then there are cells within it, and so it would just be kind of this alternating. It's just this structure that is formed in the space that is the interactive space. This is that 6-dimensional manifold structure that we talked about earlier, primary and secondary colors, and like that includes the primary, secondary colors, and your senses and limbs and PEMDAS, everything. The 6 questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. It's like this because we're interacting here with like the space that we're within, which is a being. Your constraint is causality caused beyond you or by others outside you. That's your objective constraint. The objective constraint of a being that we are within is that it is contained within itself. It cannot go anywhere else. In its relationship with us, that it can, in relationship with the being that it's within or beings that it exists next to, then sure, but like not in relationship with us. Because imagine you go and you're like, well, I moved from this room to that room. It's like your cells, that doesn't matter at all to your cells. How does that matter to your cells? It might matter to your friend, or it might even matter to the universe that you're within, because you've changed locations and changed information. But it doesn't matter to your cells because they're inside you. You are the space. You moving on our level doesn't move their space. You moving yourself, like in relationship with yourself, not in relationship with that which is outside you, that is going to be changes that your cells that's going to matter to your cells. Like you moving your arm, you eating food, you drinking water, you going to sleep. Like all of these things are going to matter to your cells, and they're going to change the causality that they have to contend with. But you can't change the space because you are the space. So this is what I'm talking about. This is where space-time comes from, according to Sentient Singularity Theory. And it's not. So she's right. It appears to be emergent, and meaning it's not. It is caused by the perceptions and interactions and actions of sentient beings and goals of sentient beings. Anything that is caused by that or defined by that is emergent. Anything that any one is fundamental, essentially. Something that isn't someone is emergent. Someone that is someone is fundamental. It's funny because she says green doesn't exist, which is funny because that's my favorite color completely. Everything in here is green, by the way. Like my pen is green. Everything is green. That I have, my wallet is green. That this knife is green. Everything is green. My favorite animal is green. So, but does green exist scientifically? If you asked current people, physicists would be like, yes, it's green exists. It's a photon that is a wave that is at this oscillating at this frequency, and it is then perceived by us, and that's what green is. And it's like, that you just described what's happening. You didn't actually define green. What is green? And I actually think that there's a much more fundamental definition of color. I I think there's a reason why we perceive and conceive of water being blue and the sun being yellow and then plants being green, and they come from like the sun and water. Like, I don't think that is not related, actually. But I don't have a complete enough model to have multiple instances of that to show right now. But just remember that, like, this is your mind inside a mind, and there needs to be complete coherence. So there's no detachment of anything other than goals. Everything that we do will have an impact, and everything that God does has an impact, and everything your cells do has an impact. And yes, each one of these things can have its own goals that are not in alignment or are in alignment, but they are personal goals still. And I think free will, if it's anything, that is, if we should even define it as anything, which I think we should, it's best defined as the freedom of will, which is like, will is the desire to do that which you want to do, and or that which is not being done, kind of fundamentally, but desire implies like what you want. So it's kind of redundant. It's just the desire to do. That's what will is. Freedom of will is the ability to make a decision on a goal. It doesn't mean that you have freedom, like you can override your instincts in every instance. It just means like you have the ability to set a goal. Like, that's what it means. Doesn't mean you always have the ability to reach it. It means you have the ability to set it. It's funny. It is what differentiates us. If I have no freedom to make any choices, which really fundamentally means like freedom to choose my goals, then I and that those goals might be, they are able to be completely different from like the goals of God or the goals of you or the goals of my cells. And my cells can have freedom to like make a choice that might not be or might be coherent and with my goals and my will, but it might not. Some cells become cancerous, some cells do their job, but this is, and you can do the right thing or you can do the wrong thing, or you can want to do the right thing or want to do the wrong thing. Like, that's what freedom of will is. I think Sam Harris said something like, you didn't choose to be here, and you didn't choose to have the genes that you have, so you didn't choose the instincts that you have, and you didn't choose. It's like, that's not what free will is. Free will is the ability to choose your goals in the constraints that you have to contend with, not without constraints. There's no ability to make a choice without constraints. You need a fork in the road in order to have a choice. Like, if there's no road, there's no choice. Like, if there's no fork in that road, there's no choice. Like, walls and ceilings, or at least walls and the floor, defines a hallway. It constrains you, but it also defines a degree of freedom. All degrees of freedom are defined by constraints. So this is, like, Sam Harris's version of free will doesn't exist. He is right, but like his version of free will is a nonsensical version. And like, why would you define something as something that doesn't exist? It's like his definition is incoherent with even having a definition. Somebody once said to me, "Do you believe in the paranormal?" And they were just, again, they were like spiraling about my work, because they recognize that it's basically like implies that God exists, which means like existence is sentient. That's all I mean by that, and has its own will. And they were like, do you believe in the paranormal? And I was like, what do you mean by paranormal? And they were like, well, you know what I mean. Just answer the question. I was like, no, actually, like there's two definitions that we could go with, because there's always 2 degrees of freedom according to Sentient Singularity Theory, which means like 2 degrees of freedom in the information processing process. And you can pick one or the other and maintain coherence, but like one of them will lead you to a dead end that makes that like kind of a redundant to define whatever it is that it is. And the other one will actually like be able to be generative, like you could build on it. And so you see this pattern everywhere. And so this, I expected it to be here. And I was like, by paranormal, you mean that which exists but is beyond our current understanding? Then yes, I believe in that. But if you mean by paranormal, you mean that which doesn't exist but is like, you know, talked about, like ghosts or something. And I'm not saying ghosts don't exist. I'm just saying like the current assumption by most people in scientific world is that ghosts are, you know, don't exist. Outside of, you know, the folklore and minds and story. And but if I propose these 2 definitions and I was like, pick one and then I'll tell you the answer. But the thing is, they realize like they're gonna know the answer as soon as they pick it. And so what it really means is like the word paranormal is stupid because, or it's a bad word, because it's useless. Almost, it's not necessary. But unless it is being used to describe that which exists, but we don't understand it's what causes it right now, or it's beyond our current understanding, to consistently perceive and predict. But you know, if it just means that which doesn't exist, then why does the word paranormal need to exist? If free will means this crazy thing that doesn't make sense and doesn't exist, then there's no need for the term free will. But if free will is a word, if free means something and will means something, and you combine the two, then like look at what that would imply. And then actually that's very consistent, you know, with what is first person experience. And I don't know exactly what Annaka believes, but I know what Sam believes because somebody shared it again. At least I know what he believed when he was recorded as stating it. And I saw it like yesterday, and it was a recording of him in some interview where he said, free will can't exist because it's just an illusion, because you can't choose your instincts, and you didn't choose to be here, and you didn't choose like this place you were born, and the state of, you know, the spin of electrons, and like it just doesn't make any sense. And but that's not like, why are you going there instead of thinking about things first from a first person perspective? To think about the world in a first principles way requires thinking about things first person first. And yeah, that's a lot of firsts, but it makes sense if you think about it. And you know, it's like, what is the truest thing that I know? I have to build everything on that, all on my understanding, because, you know, well, the truest thing I know is that I am. It's the one thing that exists everywhere that I look, no matter where I go and what I do. And so, you know, why would you ever say that that's an illusion, but everything else is, you know, potentially fundamental? It doesn't make sense. But then you have, you know, science is like, well, green, it exists in this frequency. It's like green. We're talking about the color, the experience of the perception of green. We're not talking about do photons sometimes oscillate at this frequency. I'm saying, like, does green exist as a you know, that is defined by like a perception of color, and it just like science falls apart as being this objective thing that was defined by I did a commentary on Professor Dave Explains and I forgot the other guy's name, Grayson, who were ripping on Chris Langan's CTMU, and they said that idealism, or the idea that consciousness is more fundamental than matter, meaning like the perception of matter is perceived by conscious beings, so it comes from conscious beings. They were saying that is nonsense, because science has an amazing track record, and science is defined as there is an existence objective existence is mind independent, and like that doesn't make any sense and isn't completely incapable of being even observed anywhere by you. Like, and you have to realize that, and they do not. So I think Annaka's take on free will is better than Sam's, but I don't remember if it's like perfect. Okay, let's skip forward because we're getting long. I'm trying to keep these to around 3 hours. Let's see where we're at. We're at 3 hours. I gotta call it very soon. Let's wrap it up. She says so many things that are great. Memory is due to the continuity of information that is, built by interactions of, she says, experiences, but really by experiencers over time. Or that's what time is, just causality beyond you that you have to contend with. That's all it is. It's change that is occurring beyond you. And time, it's the experience of what it's like to feel the change that you have to contend with, that is being caused by beings beyond you. That is exactly what time is. Here. Let's see. Something. Let's just do this clip. But then I'm gonna go to the chat right now, and this might be the last clip.
When this microphone was free.
Oh my gosh, there's so many. Okay. We only have 4 people watching now, but we had a lot. That was great. I appreciate everybody who was here, but I really feel bad. Do minds create reality? I don't know. What about moths, fireflies, snow eagles? Night is not even dark for me. What about the II? There are some deeply insightful discussions around this held by Penrose, Kastrup, and Fagin. Makes me wonder if eventually we will all converge on the non-duality found in Advaita Vedanta. I hate the term non-duality. I like, we're gonna converge on the singularity. Like, don't ever. An anti-ideology is never constructive. It is only destructive, and it can never be self-referential because it's always externally referential. To say, this is why anti-fascism is very different in how people who adopt that as an ideology act compared to libertarians. But if you like examine what their stated goals are, you'd think like people who are against tyranny and people that they're both just people who are against tyranny. That's not true. One of them's, and to be an anti-fascist is to be somebody who is against tyranny. To be someone who is a libertarian is to be somebody who is pro-liberty. Their goal is to have liberty. It's not to destroy tyranny. It is to grow liberty. build liberty. That's what their goal is. It's very different, even though it seems like it would be the same. And to be like anti-racist will always also like be like you're just against racists. Like you're not just. It's different from I believe that in the in assuming the equal value of all people. It's like that is a very different goal than it's like saying I have the goal of equality, which is like equality of value being, you know, assumed. That is a different goal than being anti-racist. Like you're just, that goal of that is just to destroy racism, like, but not to advance equality. Like it's a very different thing. And so when people say I'm a non-dualist, I'm like, that's a dead end. Even and the name matters. Like it absolutely matters. In my Theories of Everything, the how-to guide video, which is linked below, that I entered into the Pace One contest, I talk about this and why the name Sentient Singularity Theory is so important to it, because it is defining of the structure of what is fundamental and the nature of what is fundamental. What is the nature of fundamental reality? It's sentience. What is the structure of fundamental reality? It's singularity. And so, I mean, and this is true even in our math. Like, look at our math. Our math, if math is real, like, look at what math is. It wouldn't exist without without the existence of quantities, like multiple singular quantities, really. Like, that's what multiple quanta. Like 1, 2 is 2 ones, 3 is 3 ones, 4 is 4 ones. It's like that's defining of our math. It is in every single way. Singularity is the fundamental structure. It is mathematically the assumed fundamental structure. It is the basis of all of our mathematics. It is definitionally, linguistically, the basis of all language. This is a pen. It's one pen. It's not like it is separate and from everything else, and it's singular. And it's one pen. We don't say that's a bunch of titanium. It's like, no, that's a pen. It's one pen, one car, one wheel. And even if you say wheels on a car, it's like multiple singular wheels. That's what it means. And then when you think about experientially, you're someone. I am someone. According to my experience, that's what I feel. And so I feel that I'm someone. And math is built on the fact that there's some ones out there. And then you have even our language, which is, you know, it's a little different, but it's still due to the same being built on this singularity of sentience, is that conceptual, it's singularity of conceptuality and focus. Like, think about focus. You know, when people are like, I can multitask and I can focus on 2 things at the same time. There's like a funny Kanye West like quote that's like, he's like talking about a woman's breasts, and he's like, I like them because they prove that I can focus on 2 things at once. And like, it's such a funny line. There's like something brilliant about it, but the reality is that you're viewing it as a single structure. So like, you can only focus on one thing at a time, and you can define what that one thing is. I can focus on a whole room at once, but I can't focus on you know, that corner of the room and that shelf at the same time. I can focus on the room. And this is like, the constraint of focus is that it is singular. You focus on one thing at a time. To know this is to know yourself better, is to affirm yourself even when people are telling you that you're an illusion. It's to understand the constraints of your mind and your focus and your mental abilities and your definitional like coherence with your language and the reason for the existence of math and its most fundamental of all structures, which is 1. It's not 0. It's 1. There is no fundamental 0. So I think that's it. I'll just leave it with this last clip. This is what, like when I say, because this is perfectly encapsulating why I'm saying the name of the theory matters to its internal coherence, its external coherence, its fundamentality. You can't just have a correct theory of anything really, but especially a more fundamental theory or a fundamental theory that can just be named anything. And when I started this work, I just had models. Like I didn't have a theory. I didn't want to have a theory. I wanted to talk to people who did have theories because their models seemed consistent with mine. But then I realized nobody's theory was being chosen over any other theories, even though they're kind of similar and a lot of them, because none of them were really had a name that was like that tried to completely encapsulate as much as you could, is everything that you needed in order to get a complete picture of what is, and communicate a complete picture of what is fundamental and what is the assertion of the theory. Even conscious agent theory, which sounds almost like sentient singularity theory, or observer theory, which sounds very similar to sentient singularity theory in some ways. These are not quite there, because existence is, to understand existence, you have to understand its internal beingness, its internal process, its slash structure, which really means we call that its nature, its intrinsic nature, meaning like what is the internal, what's going on internally with existence, and what is also like the holistically going on from kind of like an outside view. And that means like you need to have, it needs a definition or a description that it describes its nature and its structure, or its process and its structure. Like mind is a structure slash process. It's not just a structure. It's not just a process. It's a structure slash process that's self-contained. That is sentient singularity. The words that we choose are and build on are what allow us to abstract. It's like they are the building blocks that you're building with. They are the map that you're maneuvering is your language. And so, and I always thought that this was like, people overhyped the importance of language, and I used to get into philosophical debates with Michael Knowles about it. And now I realize like it's so important to this type of abstraction that we're trying to do. And that's when I came up with sentient singularity theory, because I was like, what is it really? Like, what is the structure? Singularity. What is the process? Sentience. You are a sentient singularity.
There was no new matter. We just sort of took some
matter that already existed, some metal and stuff.
Recycling,
And we just sort of arrange it and put it together. And in that sense, like there is no thing like called the microphone that began to exist. Instead, we've just kind of organized something, put a label around it, right?
Yes.
And so the microphone, the table, the room that I'm sat in, all of it is just like arrangements. And there's no real like
Yes.
distinctions in essence between those things. It's just
Yes.
something that we
Although
label.
I would also say there's no real you arranging them. That it
So that's
really all
quite
it is.
crucial.
It's like it's the universe unfolding, right? These things are happening. They are events that are unfolding in the universe, including you. Like you're not outside the universe coming in and creating things. You're part of.
But
you know what I mean?
That's exactly the mystery, is that
That is incoherent. He's right, by the way, and she's right for knowing that he's right. That's what this is. And it's that we define it as a pen. It's not just an arrangement then it's like, yes, it's an arrangement, and there is no pen without somebody to define it as a pen, or sometimes like to have a goal of it being a pen, like that's what defines it as a pen, and someone has to have that goal for it to be constructed, for it to be defined. It's like, where is a grain of sand versus the beach? It just, your goal is what dictates your focus, and your definitions are what contain your focus, I guess, or contain your perception and conception. So he's right. In Sentient Singularity Theory, things that are not beings come from the perceptions and goals and interactions and actions of beings. So this was defined by me, and it was built by beings, and it's like conceived by beings. Everything about it would not exist without someone like perceiving it and desiring it and constructing it, so, and defining it. So he's right. But then when she says, yeah, but I take it a step further, there is no self, that doesn't make any sense. It is open-ended, incoherent, and exactly, it leads you get all this progress that she's made, and then all of a sudden it just drops off a cliff, and you end up exactly where the mainstream currently is, which is that it's just the universe unfolding, and there's just these there's just these waves of like motion and causality that don't seem to have any cause, because there is no someone to really have any true goals that must cause this, because if they're responsible for for causation of something, then like they exist more fundamentally than what they cause. And so that's not what she's saying. She's saying that the causer doesn't exist, but what is caused does. That's incoherent. And I'm not exactly sure why she thinks this, but there's no way to reconcile this without recognizing that like existence itself is a single someone. That's not an illusion. It's like he's like more he's so concretely existing, and I say he because it's just higher than us in a hierarchy, but I would call that God. And I'm not talking about a specific religion, I'm just talking about sentient existence as a someone. That being is so fundamentally true that they have never not existed, and can never not exist. Even if they wanted to cease their own existence, they couldn't end it. It appears to be that way, because that's what a self-contained information system is, that the universe appears to be, or that existence appears to be. It must be, by definition, existence is something exists, and it is informational, and therefore it is informing of itself, because there's nothing else to be informed, and it's informing itself of itself because there's nothing else to inform on. So that's a someone, and this is like where you have to end up, is that the self, the capital S self, like God's self, is the most fundamentally existent being or thing that being and thing, you could say, but really being that exists.
There's a great argument by
Peter van Inwagen, which basically says, okay, premise 1, there are no real distinctions between material objects. Premise 2, our minds really are distinct from each other. Conclusion, our minds are not material things. And that to me is intuitively plausible, because it does feel as though the very existence of the concept of this microphone as opposed to the table or whatever relies on a human.
By the way, he's an atheist, self-described. What he just described will logically lead you to existence as a single sentient being. It's a single mind that we're all contained within. And that's not atheism.
To put that label around it. Of course, the material would still exist in this arrangement without anyone to observe it.
Yeah.
But conceptually, it requires a mind. And so it feels like there is something that the mind is like bringing to the table, you know? And so I think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why I find it difficult to discard with the idea that I have a self that is doing that
Yeah.
conceptualizing and labeling, you know?
Good
Yeah.
job.
So you should sit a long meditation retreat.
Yeah,
is
yeah,
the
I probably
first thing
should.
that I will say.
I should.
Because having an intuitive insight for dropping the illusion of self is really, really helpful here.
Mhm.
And, I can say that as someone who, lived not understanding the illusion for most of my life and then having many experiences in succession where I was able to drop that and really see it as an illusion. I think, it informs so much of my work. It comes up a lot in the documentary. Um, I, w- I still think there's a way to intellectually understand, even though I think it just takes you many steps further once you viscerally understand it, like so many other things.
Mhm.
I don't think there is I think it's wrong to think of subjects and selves and even minds. And so, and again, there's two ways.
But
I
somehow
can kind of play the game either way
consciousness-
because I don't necessarily.
But somehow consciousness is fundamental. This is what I mean. Again, this is the same exact thing as Bernardo Kastrup, and it's like we've so great the whole time until it just falls apart. This is huge. It's everything. It's not a little nitpick that, oh, I don't agree with her on this. It's like, you are now completely incoherent. You braided this beautiful braid that was completely coherent, and it's tied on this side, and it's great. And then all we have to do is shake it a little bit, and it all comes undone because you didn't wrap it up in a way that is self-contained, like allows for this to be self-contained. And it needs to be self-contained. Otherwise, you just have no explanation for anything. When she says this, and I will say, I recognize that there are hallucinogenic substances and mental states that you can get to by taking drugs or meditating that are altered states. And I have experienced I had once had a DMT type of experience while I was completely sober, and I've talked about it here more, and I'm not going to get into it right now, but I was just thinking deeply in the shower about like the structure of like nested mines and in the cosmos, and then it was like I was out of my body and seeing a bird's eye view. It was the most intense experience of my life. And I've talked about it in like my Leoker episode. You can watch that if you want to see it. But I'd say much more about it. That experience was not the dissolving of the sense of self. And I don't know what she experienced, but the fact that she experienced a meditation retreat and had an experience at this meditation retreat means that whatever she is conceiving of as definitionally like the dissolving of the sense of self is not it's either whatever she's defining it as is a nonsensical definition for the self, or she's just confused. I don't know, but it doesn't make sense. You can't even logically discuss that experience without assuming the self. That is important. It's not just an illusion that you just assume is an illusion. At that point, she's literally just denying everything. She's denying the logic of language. Which denies the logic itself, and she's denying her own personal experience, which is the truest thing that she knows. And it is the most consistently effective perspective to take, and the only one that allows you to orient as you go through life and experience multiple different experiences. You can't orient and go through life purely relying on the perspectives of others in order to guide you. You will fall apart and you will not make it far. I don't understand what caused this. Maybe it's definitional. I don't know, but it's incoherent, completely incoherent. How can you say consciousness is fundamental, but consciousness just means experience, but the experiencer doesn't really exist? But neither does the perceptions that are being perceived and that really make up these experiences. So nothing exists. It completely falls apart.
Believe that consciousness is fundamental, but I can talk as I can begin the sentence if consciousness is fundamental, and then I can begin the sentence if consciousness emerges in brains. Either way, I don't see room for subjects or minds in the way that you describe them. Of course, there are human minds, and I can, talk about them in the same way that you do. But the idea that there's a receiver or a generator of the thoughts and feelings and perceptions, I think is false. These things are
Mhm.
just coming into being.
Mhm.
There's no you controlling anything. It's like, there is a succession there's some type of unfolding. Um,
Okay, what might help me
the,
here, and
yes.
You could tell he's like, okay, this doesn't make sense. And he agrees with her on so much up until now, and it does make sense. And by the way, again, so much respect for her for making this attempt and getting as far as she has. And the journey is not over for any of us. So like, it's not like she's just a fool. She's not at all. She's just she has there's something broken in the definition or something, and it's not allowing her to build to complete the coherence that she needs. His face is just funny that I paused on, but this it's yeah, I don't know.
This is a naive question, but if we're talking about everything sort of having fundamental consciousness,
Yeah.
what kind of is the relevance of the brain? Like, what does the brain do?
Yeah, I mean, this is where all the questions will go, but we can ask this question about.
She's right about what she thinks, what she kind of says the brain is, I think. But this is that? I thought that we were going to watch the one on language, but
I think so much of our inability to.
I guess
We're actually in a different.
oh wait,
universe
no,
than
here
what
it
we
is.
believe
Yeah, that
in.
is it.
Oh, there, yeah.
Okay.
I think so much of
Of our inability to think and speak and communicate clearly on philosophy and science is a linguistic problem. And I was
Yes.
just thinking before you mentioned
It's an
spacetime.
experiential problem too. Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking of how suitably German the phrase spacetime is, and how famously Germans will sometimes just sort of put words together to form new
Yes.
words. And you can kind of imagine how before you have the word spacetime to describe this four-dimensional fabric, which even with the word, it's hard to wrap your head around. But you can
That's
imagine
right.
just trying to like explain what this thing is when you just don't have the words. And so now, luckily, the word spacetime is common enough that people can use it quite casually, and we get what people mean. But
Yeah.
that word had to be invented
Yes.
like after the concept was thought about in order just to communicate it. And I think so
That's
much
right.
of that is what's happening in our miscommunications and inability to express our intuitions.
Yes. Yes.
That's where I'm ending it. He's right. This is why Sentient Singularity Theory's title or label or like the name of it is so important. And if there is a more fundamental theory, which good luck, you're basically going to have to argue that there's a more fundamental number than one, and a more fundamental quantity than singular or than one, and that there's a more fundamentally understood nature of it to existence than sentience, which is impossible probably because that's the truest thing that you know. But because you know it intrinsically, you feel it every second that you exist. So, but I invite people to try, and they should try. But this is why the language and the name is so important. It allows for us to communicate coherent, complete concepts. If your theory's name is conscious agent theory, it's like, first of all, that is almost two redundant terms. It's, an agent is kind of assumed to be conscious. It's an agent is supposed to have agency, which is not what now we have AI and people are like, these AI agents, they don't have agency. We're going astray because we've misdefined words. Like, what is an agent? An agent comes from the term agency. You have agency. Someone has agency. A thermostat does not have agency. But because that's not how we don't think of minds as anything other than a machine, then all of a sudden you start thinking that this thermostat is like the first instantiation of consciousness because it can differentiate. No, you've differentiated through the tool of a thermostat. But the terms and the language is important. We'll misunderstand AI. We will misunderstand ourselves. We will misunderstand the nature of existence. We will misunderstand morality. Everything about your understanding will unravel just as much as her model just unraveled if you don't get it right. The context correct. That doesn't mean you need to know every detail. You don't. You just need to know the overall context. What are you? And what are you within? And that's That's what you need to know. And that answer is a someone. You are someone, and you're within a someone. If there's no someone to define objects that exist, like scissors and pens and things, and you say that, yeah, they don't really exist, then like you can't say those don't exist, but then you like you perceive them and you define them, and then but really like there's no one to even define it. It just trying to even explain it will not make sense, because you cannot sensibly explain something that is nonsensical or nonsensical. And our language is critical. And so when he talks about space-time and he's like, this 4-dimensional structure, like what is, it's like, guys, I would have never been able to build sentient singularity theory if it wasn't for just this. And this is a linguistic starting block, a linguistic foundation. I think it is the linguistic foundation, and it is the perception, the foundation of perception, and then it is also the foundation of conception, of thinking. Is the foundation of the orientation within feeling, within thinking, within being. And then you understand, okay, why space-time? It's like, why are these three things kind of viewed as separate things, like something that's separate, something that's inside, something that's outside, and then oneness? It's like, you can't say something that's oneness. You say oneness is the characteristic of connection almost. It's like, it's different than these three. Well, that's like length, width, height, and then time is different. It's like, why does that follow the same pattern, symmetry pattern? Because this is the foundation. It's amazing, even like years later. But I'm going to call it. I know I really ignored a lot of messages. I didn't mean to. It's just really late. I don't really have time to go through them all. I think consciousness is a higher state of sentience. I don't know why, how you would define it as such, because sentience is, like you said, directly correlated with the physical plane of existence. No, it's not. It's just feeling. Sentient beings feel. What does God feel? There's no physicality to God. There's just God. Especially before there's other beings within him, but he's not within anyone else. So there is no physicality perceived by God. You have to be inside of another being in order to perceive physical structure. And God feels himself even before he created anyone else. Like, and you feel yourself. You feel emotions. You don't need, I read a letter today that apparently Richard Feynman wrote to his wife after she died. And I'm not going to lie, I started crying. Like, legitimately, like tears. I was just sitting in my office by myself and I read this letter, and I'm married. I have a wife. I know how important and like fundamental actually that relationship is. Even in Sentient Singularity Theory, it's actually like part of the structure of generativity. It's not something that you can actually just do without, that we just invented. It's something humans discovered, not in something humans invented. That's why it is, every single civilization has invented marriage. If you any population that didn't invent marriage did not have a society. Every single one. And it is the foundation of a nation, or of a society, of civilization. And so it's generative and maintains coherence, and that there's nothing else that does that. So this, I know how much that means, like intellectually with Sentient Singularity Theory, and also like experientially with my wife. And I thought about like what it would be like to be Richard Feynman and your wife dies before you, and you're just writing letters to her, And it was just like very touching. He was like, saying, I've met many very nice girls, but like I haven't gotten remarried because like you were it. And he's like communicating with her. He's like, I've realized I can bring you problems and I can work on them with you. And like, this is a man who is like one of the most respected physicists ever. And he's basically, you could say he doesn't really believe his wife is there. Why the heck did he write that letter? You're denying what is being implied. I don't write letters to no one, to people that don't exist. Even if you're like, he wrote it to himself. No, I've written letters to myself and I address myself. I don't address somebody else. But I felt something. It didn't require physical impact on me to feel anything. I felt emotion. I felt myself. Like that's sentience is emotion is the first feeling, and it is therefore like the defining feeling of sentience. It's not like you need to be able to smell to be sentient, or you need to be able to sense heat to be sentient. It's that you need to be able to feel anything, and the first thing that anyone feels, and only someone's feel, is the self. And so that's emotion, because that hurts me. That boiling water hurts me. That that food tastes good to me. It's the foundation of all feeling. Sentience is fundamental. Some might call it even cancerous if the sale could. Some might call it even cancerous if the sale is deciding to go on its own. Good mom to you, Richard. Yeah, I'm gonna call it, guys. I don't know if it seems like you guys are talking to each other, but I appreciate everybody who's been on here. Please hit the like button. I know it was long. I'm trying to keep them to like around 3 hours. But sometimes there's a lot to say. And but I appreciate it. Share this. And again, I completely respect Annaka. I'd love to have her or Alex O'Connor on at any time, just like anybody else who I discuss. The link to their full discussion is below, and the link to her audio documentary, what is it? Let There Be Light. Basically, it's Lights On is linked below as well. Peace.